At this time, the court calls State of Wisconsin versus Stephen Avery, case number 05CF381. We're here this morning for a continuation of the trial in this matter. Will the parties state their appearances for the record, please?
I will, Judge. Once again. Good morning, Judge. Once again, the state appears by Special Prosecutors Kratz, Fallon, and Gahn.
Good morning, Your Honor. Attorney Jerome Buting and Dean Strang appearing with Mr. Avery.
Thank you. I believe when we left off yesterday, the state was conducting direct examination of Mr. Kucharski.
We were, Judge, and we'll recall him at this time.
You may do so.
Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Daniel Kucharski, Kucharski.
Deputy Kucharski, good morning and welcome back. We left off yesterday morning discussing a search of Mr. Avery's garage on the 6th of November. Do you remember those conversations and questions?
Yes, I do.
Yesterday afternoon, you described for the jury the location and seizure of some .22 caliber shell casings on the floor. Do you recall that?
Yes.
I have handed you what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 220. I ask you to tell the jury what that is, please.
That's a photo of the box and the shell casings that I recovered from the scene. I put the shell casings into the box. I brought the box into the scene.
After shell casings were found and recovered, they are brought to the sheriff's department and photographed. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's what Exhibit 220 is? It's a photograph of those shell casings?
Yes.
Now, Deputy Kucharski, you didn't perform any kind of examination. In other words, you don't have the qualifications to examine the shell casings for distinctive markings or tool marks or anything like that.
That's correct. I don't have that expertise.
That happened by somebody else or somebody other than you?
If it happened, yes.
All right. Deputy Kucharski, the next area of inquiry inside the garage has to do with a vehicle, or actually two vehicles, that were in the garage when you got there on November 6th. Do you recall any vehicles being in the garage?
There was a Suzuki Samurai in the garage and also a snowmobile.
Exhibit 230, which I'm showing you and showing the jury as well. Tell the jury what it is that we're looking at.
This is the rear of the Suzuki Samurai that was inside the garage.
And at least exhibit number 230, you can see the garage door, that it's backed in or facing, if you will, what would be the main garage door. Is that right?
Correct. This picture is taken from the back of the garage on the south, facing north, towards the large overhead door.
Tell us what exhibit 231 is, please.
231 is a picture of the Suzuki, and also in the foreground is the snowmobile. This would be taken more from the northeast corner of the garage.
And once again, both the Suzuki Samurai and the snowmobile seem to be facing outward, that is, towards the main overhead garage door. Is that right?
That's correct.
Once again, Deputy Kucharski, as with these other photos that have been identified, does this appear the same or similar as what you observed on the 6th of November of 2005?
Yes, it does.
You spoke yesterday about some other stuff being in the garage. And so the jury can see a better depiction of the rest of the inside of the garage as it looked in November. we are going to be showing you some other photographs. I do want to alert Council that Exhibit 236 is very similar to a photograph which has already been received, which is Exhibit 120. It looks a lot like. I just wanted to show you that. It's going to be the same type of angle. Nonetheless, let me show you what is first marked as Exhibit 232. Tell us what we're looking at if you could.
This would be the rear of the garage, south side, taken from looks like kind of the center of the garage.
The south side would be the back wall of the garage. Is that right?
Correct. Back wall. There's no doors or anything on that wall.
Now, those items that you see in the picture, not only the larger item, meaning the toolbox or the compressor or the refrigerator freezer or other large items, but even the smaller items on the workbench or on top of some of those other things. On the 6th of November, were all those items removed or taken out or thoroughly searched?
They weren't removed on the 6th. That wasn't the depth of the search that we did on the 6th. Things weren't taken out of place or out of the garage or anything. It was more of a looking into for obvious things.
All right. What's exhibit number 232, please? Excuse me, 233.
233 would be another picture of the rear of the garage, more towards the west corner of it.
This looks more of a straight back view. Is that right?
Correct.
You can see the John Deere tractor and still see the upright toolbox in this shot. Is that right?
Correct.
What is exhibit number 234?
234 would be a picture of the west side of the garage. That would be the side with the service door all the way up towards the front.
Now, that side of the garage, and as we're looking at exhibit number 234, appears to be the most cluttered, for lack of a better term. Is that a fair representation?
Yes, it was actually. It's hard to see the depth, but it was actually several feet of clutter there.
And once again, Deputy Kucharski, were all of these items removed and thoroughly searched, or was this still more of a general search?
More of a general search. Those items weren't all removed.
What is exhibit 235, please?
235 is that west wall again to the north, showing that service door.
And what do you mean by service door?
You have got the main overhead door for the garage, and then I would call it a service door, just a regular turn the knob and open the door of your garage.
This would be ostensibly the front right corner of the garage. Is that right?
Correct.
Finally, again, at an angle very similar to exhibit number 120, but this is exhibit 236. Can you tell us what that is, please?
This is the east side of the garage next to the Suzuki, from the north facing the back of it.
So we see the Suzuki facing us. On the very right edge of this picture, you see the left wall, or what would be the east wall of the garage, and then the junk or stuff in between. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, Deputy Kucharski, the garage itself. We saw a picture yesterday of the interior of the garage, or I guess what could best be described as a picture from the threshold of the garage, looking at the floor and looking at some other things that were inside. Do you recall that picture?
Yes.
Did you also have occasion to take a look at and, in fact, photograph some of the floor, some of the concrete floor of the garage?
Yes. As we entered the garage, the first things we saw were the shell casings. And we also immediately found, in that same general area, we found reddish-brown stains on the concrete that we believed to be possibly blood.
All right. Before we get into what you thought was blood and the collection of those items, first, just want you to describe the floor.
The floor was a concrete floor, dirty with normal garage materials on it, that you would think, miscellaneous fluid stains on it, scrape marks from the snowmobile being pulled in and out. You could tell that the concrete did have a crack in it, running north and south, pretty much the full length of the slab.
First look at exhibit number 237. Do you see that picture in front of you?
Yes, I do.
And as I place it on the large screen, tell the jury what we're looking at here, please.
This is at the threshold of the overhead door. We're looking at with the snowmobile removed, that west bay of the garage.
You described for us before a crack that basically runs the entire length of the garage from generally a north to south direction. Can you point that out with the laser pointer, please?
This would be the overhead door. Where the overhead door starts, you can see the crack here, and it runs south almost the whole slab of the garage.
All right. You talked about some fluids, or what I guess on this exhibit looks like darker areas on the floor. Could you just describe those or point those out for the jury, please?
Correct. There is a fluid stain here. Also, over on the west side, by the clutter, there's fluid stains and older stains here that have been dried. Another stain here.
What's photo number 238, please?
You want to just note for the record what he is.
I'm sorry, Jed. The record should reflect that with the laser pointer, this witness had pointed out what looks like some kind of fluid stains on the concrete floor. There isn't a particular area of the floor. In other words, it's both to the left and to the right, and actually to the center of this exhibit. But there are markedly darker in color than what the other floor might be, or what's at least depicted in this image.
You just point to those again, and I will note where it is on the photo you are. You did one or two at a time. Do the first one.
Sure.
The record should reflect he's pointing to a darker stain area which appears to be near the left front wheel of the Suzuki Samurai as it's parked. He's also pointing to another one on the right side of the photograph, upper right corner near a red cooler with some thermos type mugs or something, and a lighter color gray more in the lower center of the photograph.
That sounds accurate, Judge.
All right, the court will accept that characterization.
What's photo 238, please?
238 is another picture of the garage floor, more towards the center of the floor.
Now, these different angles, just so we are clear for the jury, as you were taking these photos, did you understand the significance of either some of the items that were being depicted or some of the stains that you were taking photos of?
Well, some of the stains, obviously, if it's something that we believed was blood, that would be something important. If it was something that we thought was transmission fluid, we wouldn't think that would be important.
All right. But you took pictures of the whole floor, basically. Is that right?
Correct.
What's exhibit 239, please?
239 is another picture of the floor, more towards the rear of the Suzuki. I think in this one, we were really trying to get the scrape marks from the sled.
What's a sled?
I'm sorry, a snowmobile that was in there.
On this photo, you can see visible scratch or scrape marks right into the concrete itself. Is that right?
That's correct.
What's exhibit 240, please?
240 is a photo from the would be the south side of the garage facing out towards the overhead door, again, of the floor in that area. We get a better look at the cracks. Actually, seeing cracks that are running east and west also.
This photo also depicts some of those discolorations or stains as well as the scratch and scrape marks.
Correct.
Now, you mentioned, Deputy Kucharski, that there were some items of interest that you wish to take a closer look at and did some more investigation or inspection of. Can you describe those for the jury, please?
Well, the probable blood spots that we saw, we photographed those and collected those with swabs.
All right, let's talk about the swabbing process before we show you the photos. What does swabbing blood spots mean?
It comes in a kit from the state. I open up the kit. It's a sealed kit. We take the swab out of the kit. The swab is in a sealed package. You open up the swab and you have, in the package comes a small sealed bottle of distilled water. You put a couple drops of distilled water onto the swab, and then you take the swab and you rub it on the suspected spot. And you have got a special container to dry it and house it. Put it back in there. Put everything back together and everything back into the kit, and that kit gets put into evidence.
What kind of stains did you swab, please? I want to know what they visually look like.
They were reddish brown in color. They were dried at that time. They were circular in pattern. They were smaller. I would say some place from dime size up to a quarter size.
During this process, that is, during the identification of what you thought were blood spots, did you use some more of these evidence tints that we saw yesterday?
That's correct. As we identified the spots that we were going to take the swabs of, we put the tints by the spots.
If you look at this first photograph, Exhibit 241, tell us what that is, please.
This is an overall picture of the area where we found the suspected blood spots showing the tints.
I will show the jury now Exhibit 241, and if you could use your laser pointer, tell us what it is that we're looking at, please.
These would be the blood spots here, pointed out next to the tint.
What I see are photo or tint 1 through 8. Is that right?
That's correct.
What does that mean? Why did you use 8 different tints?
That was identifying 8 separate areas that we were going to swab.
And in fact, was that done?
Yes, it was.
What's Exhibit 242?
242 is a closer up photo of 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 tints and the blood spots, suspected blood spots next to them.
As we look at exhibit number 242, and actually since it's a digital photo, I'm able to zoom in to tint number 6 as an example. Do you remember these spots and this image in particular? And what is it that we're looking at?
You can see a few spots here to the left of the tint, and then also some type of pattern in the suspected blood spot there.
Now, those stains, whatever they were, these were collected all by the same method, that is, by using what's called swabs or these. It's a large Q-tip is what it looks like, is that right?
Yes.
What's exhibit 243, please?
243 is a closer up picture of tints 4, 5, and 6 and the corresponding blood spots, suspected blood spots there.
Again, these were all on the floor of what was later to be determined to be Mr. Avery's garage. Is that right?
That's correct.
What is exhibit 244?
244 is a closer up picture of tent 7 and 8 and the suspected blood spots there.
And we'll just take a look at that. Is this in this photo, you note, or I note anyway, what looks like a piece of paper, a chart indicating some kind of a ruler or measuring device, as well as a color palette. Can you tell us what that is and what it's used for?
That's something that we brought into the scene. That's a scale, basically. Something that if that was going to be attempted to be processed, that transfer there, that pattern would have been processed. They would have needed a scale so they can blow up the picture and process it. That's why we added it on that picture.
On the 6th of November, did you have any? This is just the first full day of searching. Did you have any idea of the significance of any of these spots or patterns?
No, we were just generally looking for items that jumped out to us. No one sent us looking for 22 long rifle shell casings. They sent us looking for patterns of anything. It was just a general search.
Deputy, we're not going to open these exhibits since it contains biohazardous materials, but we're going to show you.
Objection to that characterization. I don't believe one of these is, first of all, assumes facts not in evidence as to whether there's any biohazard on any of these items, but certainly not all of them.
The objection is sustained. We'll do it item by item.
All right. We have Mr. Wiegert here to assist. I'm asking that exhibits 252, I think it's through 261, be showed, Your Honor. Be showed to, Your Honor.
252 through 261?
I think so. The swabs, if that's what they are. All right. Mr. Wiegert, please, if Mr. Pudding can see those before you show them.
Sure.
While they are looking at the exhibits, if I can ask you just a couple of procedural questions. After obtaining samples of these swabs or any kind of evidence, can you tell the jury what happens to that after you are done with it?
Well, immediately after it's sealed, it's put in a package. It's sealed. We close up packages with evidence tape. It's a tamper-resistant tape. What it is a very thin tape. If you try and open it, it tears very quickly, so you can tell that it's been tampered with. We initialed the tape so we know that someone didn't pull the tape off and put a new piece on. It's our initials on it. And depending on what the circumstances are, they stay in your possession until we enter them into the evidence storage at the sheriff's department.
Mr. Kucharski, Mr. Pudding has been kind enough to allow me to refer to these as a group of exhibits. We will show you now what are exhibits 252 through 261. Can you identify those?
Yes, these are the packages that we put the swabs in for the suspected blood that we collected in Stephen Avery's garage.
And you identify, or can you identify those packages themselves?
The evidence tags I filled out myself. It has been opened. It looks like by the state crime lab.
Let me just stop you. That's my next question. You don't actually analyze the material, or you don't do any kind of forensic analysis on these things. You just collect them. Is that right?
Correct. Once we collect them, then that's all our expertise is in collecting them.
Exhibit 252, however, through 261, appears to not only bear your initials and evidence tape, but what you believe are those 10 separate swabs that were taken from Mr. Avery's floor.
Yes.
Garage floor. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. You can put them back. Thank you. Yesterday, Deputy Kucharski, if you could stay up there, Mr. Wiegert, I would appreciate it. Yesterday, you saw an exhibit. It was 228, an exhibit of some hanging wires. We're showing that you two now. Okay, sorry. We're showing that to you now. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
You also saw a second exhibit, what we have now come to know are evidence photos. This is exhibit 229. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
All right. Mr. Wiegert is going to hand you an exhibit, which is identified as 249.
Here you go.
If you can find that, Mr. Wiegert.
Uh-huh.
There's a tagged exhibit. If you could tell the jury what exhibit 249 is, please.
These are the electrical wires that were hanging on the rafters in Steve and Avery's garage on the 6th when we were in there searching.
The same questions as far as the collection and the tagging of those. That was a process that you yourself completed, is that correct? Or is that something that other officers complete as the week goes on?
We did not collect these out of the garage. They stayed in the garage after we completed our search.
Okay, but the identification, at least you're looking at those. Those appear to be the same as when you saw them, is that right?
That's correct.
We'll deal with their admissibility, just for the record, Judge, perhaps during the break. But, Mr. Wiegert, can you put them back on the card?
Mm-hmm.
Now, investigator, excuse me, Deputy Kucharski, how long did this search take, if you recall?
I don't remember the exact times. It took several hours.
On the 6th of November, were there other law enforcement officers, other than your search team, on the Avery property?
Yes, there were other search teams.
And do you know, or did you have an intimate knowledge of what everybody else was doing?
No, not at all.
I'm going to show you again, exhibit number 227. You may have mentioned this yesterday, but you said that this looks different, or at least there's one thing missing from when you first saw it.
Correct. This is a picture of after we removed the snowmobile from next to the Suzuki.
Will you tell the jury why you removed the snowmobile?
We wanted to look underneath and get a better look underneath the tracks and the skis to see if there was any other possible evidence underneath it.
Let me ask you, Deputy Kucharski, and there's a specific question for this. See this green compressor on the back wall?
Yes, I do.
On the 5th of, the 6th of November, was that compressor ever taken out? Was it ever removed? And was a thorough search of that area ever completed?
It wasn't removed. It was just a general search. It was never removed or looked behind, anything like that.
All right. After the search of this garage, can you tell us where you went, please?
After the search of this garage, I was called over behind the garage and to the east to assist in the loading of some burn barrels and tagging the burn barrels for evidence.
After the processing or the loading of the burn barrels, where'd you guys go then?
After they were taken away and custody was turned over, we were assigned to search Yonda's house, which would be the residence due east of the garage.
Mr. Wiegert is going to hand you, before we get too far from the garage search, a one last exhibit from the garage, exhibit number 250. Record should reflect, Judge, that Mr. Wiegert is opening the evidence bag with a cutting device. Now, although the bag itself is marked as the exhibit, I'm interested in what's inside of it. If you could tell the jury what that is.
These are the 22 long rifle shell casings that we recovered.
All right, and again, you did not examine those further. In other words, you weren't the one to look for any markings or scratches or the striations on those. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Wiegert. You can put them back on the card.
Which exhibit is that again?
250.
Is that all 10 or 11 together?
I think they are all in there. You can look at them. It's the whole pillbox full of them.
We'll let the witness tell us.
Would you count the number of shell casings that's in the box, please?
These have been packaged in there, and they're in little glass-iron envelopes, presumably by whomever processed them. There's 3 in one package and 8 in the other package.
That's 11 shell casings.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I think you left off with the burn barrels. After that was completed, where'd you guys go?
I don't remember if it was after or before. We did a search around the garage area, and sometime in there we attempted to search the area behind the garage. Myself and Investigator Remaker attempted to search a burn pit, what was later described as, but we were unable to because there was a dog there.
A dog where?
There was a dog tied up behind the garage, and its chain was long enough to get to us if we were trying to search that area.
And where was this area?
This was behind the garage, behind Stephen Avery's garage.
I will orient the jury here. I will show you what's been received as exhibit number 111. It's a computer-animated representation of that area. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is it that we're looking at?
That's the rear of the garage that we searched, and that's the burn pit area that Detective Remaker and myself attempted to search.
Could you show the jurors where you walked and how it was that you were unable to get to that area?
Well, this was the area that we were attempting to search, and this is a doghouse here behind the garage. And the dog pretty much had free reign of this area. The dog was not letting us into that area.
All right. Why not? What was the dog acting like?
Basically, the dog was vicious. It came at us, barked. I actually stood by with my weapon drawn as Detective Remaker attempted to get into there.
To search that area with that behavior of that dog, what were your options at that point?
Shit my pants and run. After our attempts, we pretty much seen we had to get the dog out of there some way if we were going to search it. There was no way to search it with that dog there.
So you chose not to search it?
Correct.
Did you destroy the doing or kill the dog?
No, we didn't want to do that.
Where did you go then?
I was sent to tag the burn barrels, and then after the burn barrels, we were sent to search Biochemistr's house.
We heard from Detective Remaker yesterday about an answering machine, or a message that was on an answering machine. Were you present while that was played in the residence?
Yes, I listened to the tape as it was played.
After completing the search of Biochemistr's trailer, where did you go?
After that, searching that trailer, we were given the assignment to pick up several items, specific items, in Stephen Avery's trailer.
And what specific items were you asked to retrieve from Mr. Avery's trailer?
We were sent there to retrieve 2 firearms, bedding out of a middle bedroom, or spare bedroom, a vacuum cleaner. I believe that's it.
Mr. Wiegert is going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 247 once he puts new gloves on. Mr. Kucharski, when looking at exhibit and tag number 247, and as Mr. Wiegert holds it up and shows us, tell us, what is Exhibit 247?
This is the Glenfield Model 60 semi-automatic rifle that we took out of Stephen Avery's bedroom.
Where was it found in his bedroom?
It was above his bed, hanging on a gun rack. That would be the north wall of his bedroom, above the headboard of the bed.
Now, you pointed yesterday to a couple of areas on the gun. I think one was that you or was that a different witness?
This is the first I have seen the weapon in the court.
Okay, I'm sorry. That was a different witness. Then that's fine. Was there another firearm that was retrieved? You can put that back, investigator. Thank you. Was there another firearm that was retrieved from the bedroom?
Yes, we also retrieved a Connecticut Valley Arms Hawken model, 50 caliber muzzle-loading rifle.
Mr. Wiegert is going to show you what's been marked for identification as exhibit number 248. Tell us what that is, please.
That is a rifle that we took out of Stephen Avery's bedroom. Again, it was in the rifle rack above the bed. Also noted in my report, the masking tape with the handwritten name on it of Steve. That was on the weapon when we found it.
And the masking tape with the name Steve. Steve. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that you left on. And do you recall that being on that weapon when you first observed it in the bedroom? Is that right?
That's correct.
You can put it back, investigator. You told us that, or maybe you didn't. I apologize. I'm confusing you with perhaps another witness. How long did this visit to Mr. Avery's trailer take?
This didn't take very long. We were sent there to specifically pick up these items. We just did a quick sweep of the residence, located the items, tagged the items, and returned to the command post. Less than a half an hour, I would think.
So you had a specific purpose to go in there?
Correct.
Deputy Kucharski, do you recall where your next search or visit was to the Avery property that day?
I don't remember if it was next, but we searched the Ford F-350 that was parked outside of Stephen Avery's garage. I believe we also went into Charles Avery's trailer that day. I don't remember which one was which.
All right. Do you remember going into any other buildings? Any business buildings that day?
On the 6th, we also would have searched what I would call the new shop building. It was a metal building that was on the property, had a type of automotive shop in it, and offices.
Within this shop building, by the way, what kind of a building did that appear to be?
It was a metal building, kind of like you would call a pole building, I guess. Warehouse type.
I have handed you what's been marked as exhibit number 245 and asked if you found this within the shop building.
Yes, in one of the offices, this was posted.
On one of the walls, there appears to be a missing persons poster. Is that right?
That's correct.
Appear to be Miss Halbach's missing persons poster.
That is correct.
Deputy Kucharski, after the seizure of all these items, and after the packaging and whatever processing that you might have done, what were your duties later that day?
Well, after all the searching was concluded, all the evidence that had been taken was brought back to the sheriff's department and then entered into evidence storage.
Now, we have heard a little bit about that process, but just generally, what does putting something into evidence storage entail?
Normally, we have an evidence room in the basement that we, as in the road deputies or whomever collects the evidence, puts the evidence into a locker. We take the key out of that locker and we place it into a drop box. That's the only key for that locker that I know of. It goes into the drop box, and then when the evidence custodian has time to enter that into his storage in the evidence room, actual evidence room, he has the key to open the drop box. He takes the key for our locker. He takes the evidence out of there and enters it into storage. For this case, though, it was so many things we were putting into evidence. We had too many things for our locker. So the actual evidence custodian was there, and he was taking things, a lot of things, directly into his evidence storage.
The next day, Deputy Kucharski. That would be on Monday, the 7th of November. Were you asked to return to the property?
Yes, I was.
And were you assigned a specific search team on that day?
No. On the 7th, I worked alone.
Okay. Do you remember what you did on the 7th?
I was sent to specifically pick up a few items. I remember a rifle out of Charles Avery's residence. I took some more weapons out of a vehicle that was parked near the new shop building.
The next day on the 8th, Tuesday, the 8th of November, did you return to the Avery salvage property?
Yes, I did.
And on that date, were you assigned a search team?
Yes. On that date, I was searching with Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Coburn.
Do you remember where the three of you went to search that day?
We searched several places, including we were sent to Stephen Avery's trailer to do a thorough search.
During that thorough search, did you have occasion to search the bedroom of Mr. Avery's trailer?
Yes, we did.
And we have heard about a lot of that search, but I'm specifically going to direct your attention to the key and the finding of the key in that bedroom. Do you recall how that occurred?
Yes, I do.
Why don't you tell the jury how that occurred, please?
We were concluding the search in the bedroom. We, as Lieutenant Link, Sergeant Coburn, and I was mostly doing the photographing and logging in and packaging of evidence. However, I did search the nightstand. I was sitting on the bed and the nightstand was right there. So when I had time between my duties, I would search the nightstand. We were just wrapping up the search and Lieutenant Link left the room to get some more boxes for some of the things that were taking into evidence. Sergeant Coburn was finishing up his search of an area on the east wall next to the bookcase. And I was sitting on the bed near the nightstand. Lieutenant Link came back into the room, stopped at the doorway, pointed at the floor, just a couple of feet away from my feet were sitting on the floor, and said there was a key there.
I'm going to show you, just as you described this, exhibit number 210. Ask if this image looks familiar to you.
That's the key. That's where the key was sitting when we found it.
How far was this key away from you as you were sitting on the bed?
Just a couple of feet.
Had you seen that key, either before Lieutenant Link left the room or at any time actually prior to Lieutenant Link's return?
No, I did not.
Now, when Lieutenant Link said, "There's a key," where was he standing when he said that?
He was standing in the doorway.
Had he gotten to that area yet when he said that?
No.
I'm just going to ask you, Deputy Kucharski, were you surprised to see that on the floor?
Yes.
What happened after you saw that key on the floor?
Lieutenant Link pointed out the key. We all looked at it. We all decided it was a Toyota emblem on it. Stopped all the searching. I had everybody stop the searching. Immediately took a photograph of it. I had taken my gloves off to finish up my tough to write and take pictures with the rubber gloves on. So I had taken the gloves off, so I put on a fresh pair of gloves. I took out a new evidence bag out of the...
Let me just stop you. A fresh pair of gloves? Does that mean that it had touched any other pieces of evidence in that room?
No, it did not. It came directly out of the package.
All right. So you put fresh gloves on. What did you do then?
I took a new evidence bag out of the stack of bags, picked up the key with my gloved hand, put it into the new evidence bag, and then I contacted the command post.
Deputy Kucharski, the jury has already seen the actual key itself, but I'm going to show you something that's been marked as Exhibit 219. Can you tell us what that is, please?
That's the key that we found on the 8th.
Photograph, isn't it?
Sorry, that's a photograph of the key.
Okay. As you look at number 219, so we don't have to pass the key itself around, is that one of those evidence pictures that's taken after it's received?
Correct.
You said that you had contacted members of the command post. Do you recall who came to that location?
Special Investigator Fassbender and Investigator Wiegert came to the Avery trailer. I showed them the key. They said that they would be sending a special agent back to take custody of the key.
All right. The next photo that I'm going to show you, Deputy Kucharski, is a photograph number 246. I want you to tell us what that is, please.
This is a photo of some of the ammunition that we took out of Stephen Avery's bedroom.
And now that the jury can see Exhibit 246, does it say on the box of ammunition what caliber of ammunition that is?
Yes, it does. It's a .22 long rifle ammunition.
And you said, I think, that you're familiar with firearms. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Excuse me, just one moment, Judge. Is this the kind of bullet that would fit into the .22 caliber rifle that you previously identified as Exhibit 247?
Yes, it is.
After completing the search of Mr. Avery's bedroom, was the rest of the trailer thoroughly searched as well?
Yes, we searched the rest of the trailer thoroughly, and then we also assigned to specifically take into evidence some of the computer and computer storage devices.
All right. Deputy Kucharski, I'm going to ask you, based upon your positioning a couple of feet away from that key, did you believe that either Lieutenant Lake or Sergeant Colburn had an opportunity, out of your eyesight, to place or what's called plant that key there?
No, they did not.
How can you be so sure?
Well, first of all, they would have had to have the key. I think the only person that would have had the key would be the person that killed Teresa.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Court will order the answer stricken.
I want you to limit your comments to your observations. What about your observations do you believe it was impossible or improbable for them to plant that key?
My actual observations, I would have to say that it could be possible, as in I was doing other things. I was taking photographs. I was searching the nightstand. So, if we're just limiting it to if it was possible that they could do it without me seeing it, I would say, yes, I guess it is possible.
All right. And is that in the sense of anything is possible?
That's in the sense of it's possible. Aliens put it there, I guess.
All right. In that regard, though, Deputy Kucharski, while you were working with these gentlemen that week, in fact, you worked with them more than one day, didn't you?
Yes.
Is there anything that either led up to that moment or anything from that moment forward that caused you any concern, either about their integrity as law enforcement officers or about the performance of their duties out at the scene?
No.
After that particular moment, that is, after the key was found, were you continued to be assigned to Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Colburn? In other words, did you have further responsibilities that day?
Yes.
Did you perform any other of what you are now calling thorough searches that day?
Yes. We made a thorough search of Charles Avery's trailer.
Now, the kind of search, again, we have talked about different kinds of searches, but could you describe the search of Charles Avery's trailer?
I would believe that would be the most thorough search that we did. I think we attempted to look in every place in Charles Avery's trailer. We actually even went underneath the trailer. We went into I wouldn't call it an attic, but on top of the trailer, there's some type of crawl space. Sergeant Colburn actually crawled up in there.
You weren't targeting or limiting your search efforts to just Stephen Avery's trailer, is that right?
That's correct.
At the conclusion of that day, Deputy, that is on the 8th, did you once again return to the Sheriff's Department and enter or log in all of this evidence?
Yes, I did.
Judge, I will be moving at this time to admit Not only the physical evidence, but the photographs that had been identified by this witness. I can list those if
Object to.
court or counsel want me to.
The only one I object to is the wire which this witness testified he did not collect.
I didn't intend to offer that to this witness, Judge.
Just one moment then.
Can we clarify what particular number that exhibit is?
Sure, that was exhibit number 249. That was the only one that we haven't offered, Your Honor.
What are 251 and 236?
251 was not identified by this witness.
Okay.
That will be a different matter.
236?
236 is a photograph. One of the photos of the inside of the garage. Photograph of the garage is 236.
Mr. Kratz, can you list the exhibit numbers of the exhibits that you are seeking admission of?
That's probably a good way to do that.
I can certainly try.
You can say like 241 through 250 or whatever. You don't have to identify them all individually, but specify the numbers.
I think I'm able to do that. I think it's exhibit number 221 is what I'm starting with, and it goes through 261, with the exceptions, Your Honor, of 251 and 249.
No objection to that then.
Alright, exhibit 221 through 261, with exception of exhibits 249 and 251, are admitted.
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Buting?
Yes. Good morning, Deputy.
Good morning.
We have a lot to cover here. Let me maybe start towards the end here. When you were asked by Mr. Kratz if it was possible that Lank or Colburn could have planted, let's say, the key without your seeing them, your answer was possible, right?
That's correct.
And there weren't any aliens in the room, right?
Not that I know of.
So your later comment about it being possible in the same way that aliens are possible really isn't a fair characterization of what you meant, is it?
Are you asking my opinion on?
I'm asking you to characterize your answer. When you said it's possible, you didn't mean that it was possible in the same sense that aliens are possible, did you?
I don't understand.
All right. Let me try it this way. You were a collections officer, evidence collections officer.
Yes.
That was part of your role.
Yes.
You also were documenting.
Yes.
And photographing.
Yes.
Taking gloves off, putting gloves on.
Yes.
And in addition to that, you were a searcher.
Yes.
You actually opened drawers or took things out yourself.
Yes.
And in the process of doing that, you looked at the items that you would take out, right?
Yes.
And your attention and your focus would be on those items, right?
Yes.
And you were not told at the beginning of that shift that your function was to be a watchdog for Mr. Lank and Mr. Colburn, were you?
That's correct.
You were not told to keep your eyes on those two officers at all times.
Correct.
In fact, this was a lieutenant and a sergeant, right?
Yes.
Both of whom certainly outrank you, right?
No.
You were a deputy.
They weren't in my chain of command. I work for the Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
Okay. In terms of officer rank, they outrank you though, right?
They held a higher rank in Manitowoc's
Okay.
Sheriff's Department, yes.
And did you ever know them before?
Never met them before.
Never met them before. Okay. But you knew their rank.
Yes.
And I'm going to object as irrelevant. And so does General Schwarzkopf, but that has nothing to do with this witness.
This is a cross-examination.
This is Cross. I will give him a little latitude.
You knew their rank.
Yes.
sergeant, and lieutenant.
Yes!
And I take it that it never occurred to you that a fellow law enforcement officer would do something like plant evidence, did it, on that day in that room?
No!
That was not on your radar, was it?
No!
You were not watching Lank and Colburn to be sure that they did not plant evidence, right?
That's correct.
What we do know is that when you came into that bedroom the first time, there was no key on the floor, was there?
That's correct.
And you had been in that bedroom searching with Lank and Colburn for about an hour, close to an hour, by the time that key was discovered, right?
Approximately, yes.
3 people in that little bedroom, right?
Yes.
And Colburn and Lank were both searching the desk and bookcase in that area, right?
Yes.
The 2 of them, I think I will put that up on the Elmo again. I'm showing you exhibit 104, which is now up on the screen. Do you recognize that?
Appears to be some type of model of the bedroom in Stephen Avery's residence.
All right. And it's missing a lot of items though, right?
Looks like just the furniture and the walls and windows and that type of thing is missing.
But over in the, what would be the top right photo or corner of this photo, there's a desk and a chair, right?
Yes.
And a bookcase with some sort of vertical slots.
Yes.
And there were lots of things on and in those items, right? At the time?
Yes.
We're talking November 8th.
Yes.
And that's the area that both Lieutenant Lane and Sergeant Colburn were searching, among others.
Among others, yes.
But during that 1 hour, they were searching in that area, right?
Yes.
Do you remember the key picture, exhibit number? Do you have the photograph up here with you, the key on the floor?
Oh, on the floor? I don't think so.
It's 210.
210. Showing you 210 again up on the screen. That's what you were looking at earlier, and you took this photo, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And that's exactly the way the key looked when you first saw it?
That's correct.
And there's also an evidence, some sort of looks to me like a grocery bag, but a brown corrugated sack or something like that, right?
Correct. In the foreground.
And was that there when Lieutenant Lank left the room, or did he bring that back in with him?
He didn't bring it back in with him. I don't remember its exact placement as he left the room.
All right. And you were actually very nearby searching the nightstand.
Yes, my feet would have been just on the other side of that paper bag.
And so bear with me for a minute. I don't know if my shadow can be on here, but so you were turned like this with your back to where the key is, searching the nightstand, weren't you?
No.
You were seated on the bed doing it then, right?
Yes.
But your body is turned so that this key is slightly behind you or over your shoulder.
No.
Well, do you see the nightstand in there?
No.
The nightstand is off the screen altogether, isn't it?
Yes.
So if you are able to reach the nightstand, you've got to be over here somewhere to the left side of this photo. Or were your feet hanging over the top of the bag?
No, they were just on the other side of the bag. My feet were actually pointing directly towards the key. It was sitting there, and the nightstand would have been to my left hand. The key would have been directly in front of me.
Okay, well, but you didn't see the key.
That's correct.
The key was right smack dab in front of you, and you didn't see it until Lank pointed it out to you?
That's correct.
And yet you immediately recognize this key as something of importance, right?
As soon as we saw it was a Toyota key, yes.
Now, sometime earlier than that, I don't know, Judge, do you want to take a break yet?
I was going to let you finish this line of questioning, then take a break.
Why don't we take a break? Because I may want to do something, and I would consider that before.
All right, members of the jury, we'll take a morning break at this time. I will remind you again not to discuss the case in any fashion during the break. You may be seated.
I don't have anything else for the record. I just want to look through the exhibits before I show them to this officer.
Very well. We'll report back in 15 minutes. At this time, Mr. Buting, you may resume your cross as soon as we get a witness.
All right, Deputy, we were talking about this key when we left off. And if I understand, and I'm not sure if it was in your testimony, but if I understand your report, just before Lieutenant Link left the room, he and Sergeant Colburn were searching the cabinet that's displayed here on the screen, right next to the key, right?
Yes. Before he left the room, they were searching. Lieutenant Link was assisting Sergeant Colburn move it around and stuff.
Lieutenant Link was about 1 foot from you when he was doing that, right?
Yes.
So his body would have been between you and this particular area.
Yes.
All right. And you guys talked after it was found, like, geez, where did that come from, right?
Yes.
Did you examine the back of this bookcase cabinet at that time?
Not directly after it was found. After it was found, I was pretty much married to it, and I stayed with it until Special Agent Joy took it. And then we went back into the bedroom and completed a search. We took a look at that cabinet and tried to figure out where it came from.
Did you seize the cabinet at that time?
No, we did not.
You didn't do that for like another month, right?
I never did.
You didn't have anything to do with that. Well, let me show you a photo. I'm going to tell you that it's not the same day. Apparently, you didn't take any photographs that same day of what the back of this cabinet looked like, did you?
No, I did not.
But you theorized between you and Lang and Colborne that perhaps the key had fallen out of the rear panel of this cabinet.
Well, we had several theories.
Let's talk one at a time.
Okay. Yes, one of the theories was it came out of the back of the cabinet. That's what we decided was the most likely.
All right. You also theorized that maybe there was a hidden compartment or something in the cabinet.
No, we didn't find any hidden compartment.
Oh, you looked, right? You looked for any hidden compartments.
Not me personally, no.
Well, then you say we didn't find any key. How do you know that you didn't find any?
Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Colborne looked.
Okay.
While I was there.
And while they were there, they didn't find any hidden cabinets or compartments in that cabinet.
Correct.
And another theory was that perhaps it had been underneath, somehow caught up underneath the cabinet, right?
Yes.
And that was ultimately discarded, and you guys settled on this theory that somehow the key just managed to get around through that gap.
In my mind, it was a general that it came from this cabinet. There was some thought of in a door area. There was something on the wall that it possibly could have came from there, but it was pretty quickly dismissed.
Right. Because there is an outlet right next to it and an electrical cord, right?
Right. That's not what I was talking about on the wall. Something higher up on the wall.
All right.
You know, several feet off the floor, but it was pretty obvious that it couldn't have come from there.
Okay. So then your theory that you came up with on that day to explain why no one had found this key was that, and by the way, the cabinet was pretty close to up against the wall, right? Wasn't just sitting out 3 inches or so, was it?
It wasn't sitting out noticeably. I can't really say as how close it was to the wall, but it wasn't. It wasn't a foot away from the wall.
Okay, so at any rate, I don't know if I need these gloves, but since I saw Detective Wiegert use them, I'll use them as well. The theory was then that this key and the cloth fob and the plastic buckle somehow managed to come out the back corner, walk around the side, and lay like that, right?
Object, Judge. That's a mischaracterization of the evidence.
Well, that's up to the witness to answer. I will allow the question.
As we were searching that bookshelf, the bookshelf was
Let me just hold on.
pulled away.
Objection. He asked for an explanation.
I asked if that was his theory. He can say yes or no, and then we'll go from there. This is a cross-examination.
No, I'm going to allow him to give his answer.
Okay, go ahead.
The bookcase was pulled away, turned, searched, and it was reasonable that while it was turned away, it fell into that area.
But this key, can I show this to the jury?
Yes.
Is there some reason we're keeping gloves on with this, that the jury can't just handle it for themselves, or?
From what my understanding is, there may be, but...
All right, we'll deal with that if need be. I will hold it up so everybody can see it, okay? You didn't hear it hit the floor whenever it got there, right?
Correct. The floor is carpeted.
Well, can I drop it on the floor here, or do we not want to do that?
What are we doing, Judge?
We're testing.
Is this an experiment in front of the jury? If it is, then we need to replicate the conditions. I object to any experimentation at this time.
That's fine. We'll hold off on that. The bookcase hasn't come in, so I don't know if they intend to introduce it or not, but it's not here. In any event, you did not hear it hit the floor or carpet or otherwise.
Correct.
And as you, not Lieutenant Link and Colburn, but as you were sitting there thinking, my gosh, how did this key get here? One of the theories that did not occur to you was that Lieutenant Link or Colburn perhaps put it there, was it?
Did not occur to me, no.
But as you testified before, because you were busy and occupied with other duties, it is possible that that might have happened without you seeing it, isn't it?
Possible.
Thank you. The electrical wire that we saw a photograph of and that you saw a picture of as well, right?
Yes, I saw a photograph.
You know what we're talking about.
Yes.
It was up on the rafters.
Yes.
Are you a hunter?
Yes.
Do you hunt for deer?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what people do when they catch a deer and bring it home?
I'm going to object, Judge, assuming a fact not in evidence. I suspect Mr. Avery is not a deer hunter. If he is, we have got some other issue.
Well, he may or may not be, but I'm going to allow the question.
Do you typically hang a deer in a garage after you've done something to it, dressed it, gutted it?
We hang it outside.
Okay, but you know that some people do hang a deer in the garage, right?
I would assume.
In fact, there was a deer in the neighboring garage that very day.
Yes.
Objection, irrelevant.
It's completely relevant.
Brenda Dassey can be a deer hunter. Stephen Avery can't.
If we're going to argue this in front of the jury, I think that's a problem.
I'm overruling the objection.
There was a deer hung from the rafters in the garage right next door, right?
Yes.
And so you don't know whether this wire was used to hang deer in that garage on some occasions either, do you?
I don't know what the wire was used for.
Do you know whether wire was ever sent to the crime lab for any kind of tests?
I don't know.
Okay, I suspect we'll hear if it was.
I ask that that be stricken, Judge.
The court will order that that remark be stricken. The jury is instructed to disregard it.
Okay, we looked at a few photographs of the garage. Let me move to the garage for a minute. Were you taking photographs?
I took photographs.
All right. Did you take any photographs before anything had been moved out of that garage completely as is?
I took a lot of photographs. I would have to go through my photo lineup to see if I did.
None come to mind, do they?
No.
And so we don't really have a complete photographic record of what Mr. Avery's garage actually looked like with all the items in before anything was moved out, correct?
I'm not sure.
You said it was pretty cluttered, right?
Yes.
Not a whole lot of room in there, even when you got there, right? For instance, Exhibit 231 shows the snowmobile and the Suzuki Samurai
Yes.
together. We can't see what's to the right of the snowmobile, though, right? In this photo?
Correct.
Do you know what an engine hoist is?
Yes.
Have you ever seen one before?
Yes.
I show you what's been marked. Actually, I will show it to counsel first. I'm sorry. I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to have you identify these. I'm just going to, but for the record, I will say it's Exhibit 262 and 263. You said you're familiar with what an engine hoist looks like, right?
Yes.
Can you just tell me whether or not that large black item is an engine hoist?
That is an engine hoist as I know it.
Now, just so we're clear, this photograph was not taken in November. This was taken later in March, right?
I have no idea when this photo was taken.
Does the garage look familiar to you, though?
It's Stephen Avery's garage. Yes.
Okay, and in it is a large hoist.
Yes.
Where in the garage was it in November, right as you walk in? Do you recall it?
I don't recall.
Do you recall that this was behind the tractor as you walk into the garage?
No, I don't recall.
Is it possible that it was?
Yes.
All right, because we don't have a picture of that area to the immediate right before items started getting moved in and out of the garage, correct?
Yes. Yes, we do.
We do?
The only item we removed was a snowmobile.
Okay.
Besides the items that we collected for evidence.
We looked through these photographs of the tent, little tent things, little quickly the first time around. I just want to go through them with you again for a moment. You mentioned items 1 through 8, I think, along the right side of the photo, right?
Yes.
There's another item, number 16 down here, a little tent.
Yes.
What was that?
I don't recall.
And do you see that crack that begins from where item 16 is and runs? What would be north and south along the left side of the photograph?
Yes.
That's the crack that you were saying was the big crack that went the full length of the garage, right?
Approximately.
And you're down on your hands and knees or squatting or something in order to find these little blood stains, aren't you?
The bloodstains were pretty evident. No one
Well, you get down
on their hands and knees.
You get down in a squat position.
I'm sorry. You're going to have to talk one at a time. No one was down on their hands and knees?
Not that I saw. It was a dirty floor.
Okay, but you would have to squat down, at least squat down in order to make your circles and put your tents and all that stuff, right?
Yes.
So you're getting your face within just a couple of feet or so from the floor.
Yes.
And you're looking for any evidence at that time of a possible homicide, aren't you?
We were. There was a general search. We were looking for evidence that stood out. Didn't have to have anything specific at that time that we were looking for.
Well, officer, you picked up some shells, right?
Yes.
And you thought that maybe these were relevant, right?
Yes.
And that they may, in fact, have possibly been involved with a homicide. That's why you took them, isn't it?
Yes.
So you were looking for evidence of a homicide.
Yes.
Including shells, right?
Yes.
and any bullets that you might come across, right?
Yes!
And you are also at the same time looking for blood stains on the floor, which can be very small, dime or smaller, right?
Yes!
And you were looking all along this crack, virtually every area that is open floor in this whole area. You're looking for blood stains or anything that might be evidence of a homicide, right?
Yes.
Pointing now to the left lower side of this photograph where there's a crack. Did you see a bullet on November 6, 2005?
No.
Because if you had, you would have collected it, wouldn't you?
Yes.
That would have been extremely important evidence, right?
Yes.
And you did not.
I did not see it. A bullet there.
Who else was searching with you?
On the 6th, in the garage, was Lieutenant Link, Sergeant Coburn, and Detective Remiker.
So 4 of you in that garage, right?
Yes, we had a foursome.
And none of you found a bullet or bullet fragment, did you?
That's correct.
Now let's look at Exhibit 243 for a moment.
Counsel kind of zoomed in on it before, so let me do that with the Elmo.
You're not running this show, Kucharski. I am. Actually, looks to me like it may be slightly different, but you mentioned that there were 2 little areas that you thought might be bloodstains there.
Correct. There's spots, and then it appears to be some type of pattern.
Do you have the laser up there?
Yes.
Could you point to where those 2 are exactly?
The 2 that the tent for 6 was identifying were these spots, and this is the pattern.
So when you use your swab, did you swab them separately, or did you swab this one, put it in a bag or whatever, swab this one, and then put it in a bag? What did you do?
I wasn't taking the swabs.
Oh, you weren't?
No.
Well, who was?
Detective Remiker, Lieutenant Link, and Sergeant Coburn were taking the swabs, or giving them to me, and I was packaging them.
All right. You were watching. You were seeing how it was done, right?
Yes.
So you don't know, or do you, whether this swab from number 6 pertains to this spot, or this big blotch, do you?
No.
If they thought they were separate items, they probably would have swabbed them separately. Would that be the procedure?
Well, the procedure that I decided, we had several drops of blood and patterns. You normally take several swabs of them, and we decided to take many swabs of them, pretty much as many as we could. I had a limited amount of swabs in my kit, so we used what we had, but we took many swabs from there.
Okay, but just so we're clear here, when you said, I think it was items 1 through 8 that were swabs of possible blood, you didn't know it was blood, just possible.
Correct.
And we entered a whole bunch of these exhibits together. They all say, I'll let you look at a couple of them. I think they are all pretty much the same. Well, maybe not. Let me look here. I'm going to show you Exhibit 659, which is one of these little paper bags. Take a look at that for a moment, would you please?
Yes.
And that says, description of it is, well, why don't you just read it?
Test control possible blood drop.
Okay, so control, what does that mean? Do you know?
Yes. When we're trained, there is some debate right now as to whether a control is even necessary. When I was in school, they said that it was basically up to us. A control would be, you have the suspected spot, and then a control would be a relatively uncontaminated area. I think the reasoning behind it is to try and pick up any type of contaminants that may be in that area besides suspected blood. But again, it was something that they said was optional at this point in time.
Who was telling you it was optional?
The trainers at Fox Valley Technical College.
When did they tell you it was optional? When you were there? or since?
When I went to school in 2005.
Okay, so this exhibit in front of you, Exhibit 259, does that have more than one swab in it, or should it?
Yes.
Just what, 2, 3, 5, or do we have any way of knowing?
Open it up.
Well, I mean, it's practice to put in more than one swab in each little bag.
Inside the bag, they are in separate containers.
Okay, so there could be more than one swab in each one of those bags.
Yes.
And the fact that there is a control taken, there should be, right?
Correct.
Looking at 651, read what that says, please.
It says test control, and then control is crossed out, and then continues, possible blood drop.
So with control being crossed out, does that mean there is no control, most likely, in this one?
I would assume so.
What exhibit was that? You said 600 something.
I'm sorry, it's 255. The tag number is 651. And actually, this is your handwriting, isn't it?
No, that's not my handwriting.
Doesn't it say Officer Kucharski on it?
Yes, it does.
I'm sorry, Kucharski.
Yes.
All right, you didn't fill this out, but it has your name on it.
That's correct.
Okay, do you know who did?
No, I don't.
All right, you don't know who sealed it either.
I would have to look at the package to see if there's initials on it.
Well, probably not important, so let's move on. Let me just clear up a couple of things here. When you do these swabs and you're looking for possible areas of blood, do you do a phenolphthalein test? Do you know what that is?
I'm thinking that's some type of presumptive test.
Correct. And do you do those? Did you do those on this day?
I think at the beginning, we may have done one just to make sure that what we were looking at was blood. I'm not positive on that, though.
All right, so you may not have. But in any event, you're picking out spots on the garage floor that may or may not be blood, right?
Correct.
Because you mentioned that there's a number of big areas of fluid and that sort of thing, like you often find on a garage floor, right?
Correct.
And like this exhibit right here, I'm going to put up a different one to show a little bit more. Perhaps the untrained eye had a lot of red spots just above the exhibit or the evidence tent number 6, correct?
Correct.
But that's not blood, is it?
I don't know.
Well, did you swab it?
I don't know.
Have you ever seen transmission fluid?
Yes.
Have you ever seen it stain a floor?
Yes.
Is transmission fluid red?
Reddish brown tinge, if I remember. Yes.
Okay, and there's lots of stains like this particular red one in that garage. Is that fair to say?
I didn't hear a lot of scenes.
A lot of the stains like this, the reddish,
Yes.
sort of brighter red stains.
Yes.
You're looking more for dark brownish red, right? When you're looking for blood.
Yes.
And this, let me just go back for 1 minute. You mentioned right under the 6, there's what's commonly called a contact type of a stain right there, right? It shows a little bit of a pattern.
Yes, it's some type of pattern.
Did you ever make a determination of what that was?
I'm not trained in blood patterns.
Well, did that look like a blood pattern to you?
It's a pattern.
Looks like some sort of something contacted it with circles, like a footprint, perhaps.
Something like that.
And similarly, number 8, I'm sorry, this is exhibit number 244 by the 10th. You have that little measuring stick or whatever next to some sort of a contact pattern there, right?
Some kind of pattern, yes.
Do you have any information as to whether that was ever identified as anything of relevance?
I don't know.
Okay. Could have been just, again, totally unrelated to anything in this case, as far as you know.
I don't know if it was related or unrelated.
All right. Exhibit 245 is the missing poster for Teresa Halbach that you found in the office of the Avery property, right?
I found it. We found it in one of the offices of what I call the new shop building.
Well, this isn't going to do what I want to do, so I'm just going to show it to you instead. Actually, I think we have one of these better. Okay, again, I'm going to just show you Exhibit 10, which has already been identified and introduced as an exhibit. That's a color version of the same thing we just saw on the prior exhibit, right?
Yes.
And it has information about the missing woman, right?
Yes.
And also about her vehicle, does it not?
Yes, it does.
And does it have a license plate on there?
Yes, it does.
SW William 582?
SWH 582.
SWH, okay.
H as in Henry.
And how would you say that if you're calling in a license number? What's your code for those letters?
S, Sam, W, William, H, Henry.
Okay. And it also has the year of the vehicle, does it not?
Yes, it does.
1999.
Yes.
All right. So if you had this information ahead of time, would there be any reason for you to have to call your department to ask them to identify the owner of SWH 582?
Objection, Judge. Calls for speculation, especially with this witness.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Now, you said you're not a blood pattern expert, right?
That's correct.
But you have been to the academy and you have had training, correct?
I don't think I have been to any academy.
I'm sorry, Fox Valley, you mentioned.
I went to evidence school there, yes.
Okay, and have you ever been at you've been at a number of crime scenes, I assume, correct?
Yes.
Including ones where there are shootings.
No, I have not been to a shooting crime scene that I can remember.
Okay, but part of your evidence collection training, were you taught about how to collect evidence from the scene of a shooting?
I think it was more general. I don't think they specifically said this is what you do at a shooting scene.
Well, for instance, we looked at a number of these exhibits, number 2, 3, 4 being, first, I want to direct your attention to this one you said was one of the west wall of the garage.
That's correct.
The wall right as you come in the door, the service door.
Correct. Coming in the service door, it would be to your right.
And you mentioned that there's even more cluttered with junk than it looks like here because it's really quite deep.
It's hard to tell the depth in this photo, yes.
It really fills up probably 4 feet from the wall or more.
I would approximate 4 feet, sure.
Okay, lots of items there. Also, exhibit 233, which shows kind of part of the right, that would be the southwest corner and then the southern wall of the garage, right?
Yes.
You can't actually see the corner, but you can see stuff is piled all the way out that far.
Correct.
And also the big John Deere tractor.
Yes.
So there really was not very much open floor space in that garage when you walked in. Isn't that true?
I guess approximately, maybe. Do you want me to approximate the size of this space?
Well, we probably have it to the half inch on our computer animation, But why don't you just tell us what you think the overall interior size of the garage is?
Of the entire garage, it's a typical two-car garage, you know. And then that west side is like a storage area where you have got 4 or 5 feet of storage inside your two-car garage.
And the east bay of the garage was completely filled except for maybe a couple of feet behind the Suzuki Samurai. Isn't that fair?
You could walk around the Suzuki on all sides.
But the Suzuki largely filled up the east bay, correct?
Yes, it filled up the east bay.
But the Suzuki, because it's a smaller SUV, there was some space behind it.
Yes.
That was open.
Yes.
And then there's a snowmobile next to it in the west bay, right?
In the center portion of the west bay, yes.
And then there's a tractor. So there's really the only open space in that whole garage was sort of maybe 3 or 4 feet in the east bay going back towards the rear.
Yes, a portion of the east bay that wasn't taken up by the snowmobile was open.
And then right next to that open area is all of this clutter, many items, right?
To the west of it, yes.
Many items that would be difficult to wipe clean of any blood spots, if there was any blood spatter. Isn't that right?
Objection calls for speculation, and he said he wasn't an expert in that field.
Sustained.
Did you see any little spots of blood all over things?
Just on the floor.
Just on the floor. And those look like drops, right? I mean, not like, well, strike that. You're not a blood spatter. I won't ask you. Of course, if you had seen anything that looked like blood spots on any of the items surrounding that confined open area, you certainly would have made note of that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And you did not make note of it.
Correct.
Let me ask you just briefly, after you were done with the garage, you and Remaker attempted to go around to the rear of the garage.
I'm not positive on when exactly we did that. If it was before or after, I take the burning barrels.
But it was sometime after the garage had been searched. Is that your recollection?
Correct. We were finishing up the garage and we took a look around the outside along with the inside.
Okay. And you said you were unable to approach because this dog was barking?
Barking and coming at us, yes.
Okay. And you knew the dog would have to be removed in order to search that area?
Yes.
And this is November 6th, right?
Yes.
Let me move back to the prior day, November 5th.
Yes.
One of your duties was actually working with dog handlers, wasn't it?
Yes.
In fact, you spent almost your entire duty at the Avery property on November 5th going around with dog handlers.
Yes.
And dogs.
Yes.
And dog handlers are experts at handling dogs, right? To your knowledge?
I would assume they are experts at handling their dogs.
All right. Did you ask any of those dog handlers to come and remove that dog from behind the rear of Mr. Avery's garage so you could search that area?
That night, we came up to that berm there from the area that the cars were stored with the dog handler. And the dog was on top and it was barking. And I don't remember if I decided or if she decided that she didn't want her dog being distracted by the other dogs, so we stayed away from that area.
You're talking about the previous night now, November 5th, right?
That was the 5th, yeah.
Okay, so knowing that and having seen that dog behind Mr. Avery's garage on the 5th, did you make any effort to have one of these dog handlers or someone else remove the dog?
No.
How about the 6th? Didn't do that either.
Absolutely not.
Let me move to the firearm shells for a moment. You testified here today that you, on November 6th, seized 10 or 11 shells, correct?
Yes.
You testified before in this case, though, haven't you, at a preliminary hearing?
Yes.
You were under oath then, right?
Yes.
Just as you are today.
Yes.
Do you recall testifying on that occasion that you seized 10 shells?
Yes.
Never said 10 or 11, did you?
Correct.
And in fact, the exhibit that was shown to you, which is marked as Exhibit 250, this is the one that, the bag that has the little pill box with shells in it, right?
Yes.
And we had you count how many shells were in there earlier, correct?
Yes.
11 is what you came up with.
Yes.
You don't know how they got in this bag, these two glassine bags.
No, I don't.
But one has 3 and one has 8.
Yes.
If, in fact, you seized 10 shells from the garage and we have 11 in this pillbox, how do you explain that? Or can you?
In my report, I put that we took 10 shell casings from the garage. On the evidence sheet, I put 10 shell casings from the garage. When I reviewed the photos, there were 11. I miscounted.
You said you reviewed the photos and you counted 11.
Correct.
You told us earlier that you didn't take photos of all the shells. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Because some of them were under items, and so you couldn't photograph them in their location.
Correct.
You actually moved, lifted up items in the garage, some of that junk, in order to find some of those shells.
I didn't lift anything up. It would have been Lieutenant Link, Sergeant Remaker, or Detective Remaker, or Sergeant Colborne.
Okay. One of the 4 of you actually had to move some of that junk in order to find the shells. They were not all lying in the open somewhere.
They weren't all lying out in the open. I can't really testify to what they did. I don't know if it was inside of something or
Okay.
if it was underneath or what.
All right. But in any event, you don't have photographs that show 11 shells, do you?
Just this photo here, Exhibit 220.
All right. Now, I'm showing you Exhibit 264. Will you look at that for a moment and identify that?
This is the evidence property document that I filled out. A copy of it that I filled out for, among other things, the 22 long rifle casings that we collected.
All right. And it has got these 2 swabs of these garage stains, unknown stains, right?
Correct.
And it has also got number 11. It says 10 22 long rifle empty casings from garage floor, correct?
Yes.
Now, underneath that is item 12.
Yes.
That says 122 empty case.
No.
What does it say?
223 empty case.
Oh, so that's a completely different type of bullet or
Case.
shell.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a Remington 223.
So that could not explain why there's 11. Is that what you're telling me?
Right.
Couldn't it be that those were mixed up?
Not in the package, but I'm thinking that's where it was mixed up, that it's between 10 and another one, the 11. I think that's where it got mixed up, not the actual cases got mixed up, just the number of count.
Well, Exhibit 220, which you identified earlier as a box that has some. Do you know when that photograph was taken?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether that was before or after it went to the crime lab?
I don't know when it was taken.
All right. So you didn't open it. I mean, this used to be, if this was evidence that was seized at the garage, I assume that it would have been in one of these nice little bags, all sealed up with tape, right?
Yes. Well, it was in the box for sure. Sealed. The box was sealed. I don't remember if I put it in another.
Okay, so the box could have been a box like this that was inside the bag that has a seal on it, right?
Correct.
But there's no tape on that particular box that we can see, right?
No, it's been opened.
That's what we're referring to, correct?
That's the picture, yes.
And did you ever amend your report to indicate that there were 11 casings instead of 10?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever amend that property inventory sheet, which we just marked as Exhibit
264?
264?
No, I did not.
And in fact, you came to the conclusion that, oh, maybe there really were 11 instead of 10 when somebody showed you this exhibit that's now on the screen. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Somebody else who had opened the evidence bag after you.
I don't know who opened the evidence.
Who showed you this photograph?
District Attorney Kratz.
And that's when you determined that you had miscounted and that there were really 11 instead of 10, right?
Yes.
Okay. This rifle, you indicated that you have some expertise of sorts because you're work for the armory.
I'm the armorer for the county.
Okay. This item here, that's the 22 marked as Exhibit 247. It's a pretty common firearm, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
It's pretty cheap.
Yes, relatively. I don't think too many guns are cheap anymore.
Well, maybe between $100 and $200, something like that.
I would have to look up what the price is.
Buy it at Walmart or places like that.
I believe Walmart stopped selling guns now. I don't know what they used to carry or do carry.
But it's the kind of gun that many people have.
Yes.
Many. It's a standard cheap 22.
Yes.
Used for hunting rabbits and things like that.
Used for a lot of things, yes.
In fact, you found another one very similar to that on the Avery property, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And that one was also a Marlin Model 60 SS 22 caliber semi-automatic rifle you found a Marlin Model 60 SS 22 caliber semi-automatic rifle in another residence.
Yes.
Sort of next to a refrigerator.
Yes. I thought I heard you. The exact rifle. There are some differences between the rifles.
But they are similar.
Yes.
Same class, certainly.
Same model.
Same model, even. Okay. Do you remember where you got that?
That was out of Charles Avery's residence.
Also known as Chuck?
Chuck! Yes.
Did you test that rifle to see if it had been recently fired?
That's beyond my scope of expertise.
Did you test this rifle?
That's beyond my...
From Mr. Avery's residence?
That's beyond my scope of expertise.
Are you aware of whether anybody tested it to see if it had been recently fired?
No, I'm not aware.
And so you also found some 22 rifles in the Yonda trailer right next to Mr. Avery, didn't you?
We found weapons in the Yonda trailer. I don't remember exactly which ones were where. I seized quite a few weapons out of Chuck Avery's, Stephen Avery's, Yonda, shop building, vehicles that were there. But placing all the other ones, I don't know.
When you say weapons, these are basically hunting rifles.
Firearms.
Basically rifles.
Rifles, shotguns, pistols.
All right. But the majority appear to be the kind people would use to hunt.
Some, yes.
Okay. And the ammunition that you identified, do you still have that photograph up there, or did I take it away from you?
I have Exhibit 246 of the 22 long rifle ammunition.
That's also very common ammunition, right?
Yes.
It fits any 22.
No.
Any 22 long rifles?
Yes.
Would it have fit in any of those other 22 long rifles that you seized on the Avery General 40-acre property?
Yes.
And the two rifles that are introduced here in court that are sitting over on this evidence table, the muzzle loader and the 22 long rifle, those are the only two firearms that you found in the trailer in which Mr. Avery resides, right?
Yes.
Do you know who owns that trailer?
I don't know who owns the trailer.
Do you know who owns those firearms?
Objection. Irrelevant, Your Honor. Possession, not ownership.
Ownership goes to possession as well.
I will allow the question.
Do you know who owns?
There is a difference between determinative and relevance.
Correct. Hearsay, Judge.
That's too early for that. The question is, if he knows.
Yeah. Do you know who owns those firearms?
I would have to assume I don't know.
You don't know?
Correct.
You're assuming just because you found them in that trailer.
I assume Stephen Avery owns them because they were found in his bedroom, because the one has tape on it and it says the name Stephen.
Tape on it. Kind of like a neon sign. Right here, Steve. Right?
Yes.
Pretty obvious, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any redirect?
This witness, Judge. Thank you.
All right, the witness is excused.
I would move. No, I'm not moving it yet. Sorry.
Okay, it's 10 to 12. I don't know if it pays to get into another witness at this time.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, but the property inventory sheet up there, I would move that into evidence. The other two photographs, I'm withholding for the moment.
264.
264.
Any objection?
No, Judge, but I wanted to remind the court there was maybe something before lunch that we might want to put on the record, unless we were going to do that after.
I don't remember if it was before or after. I thought it was after. Maybe I was mistaken. Does either party have anything they wish to put on the record outside the presence of a jury before lunch?
No, Your Honor.
I'm going to take that as a no for now.
Other than there would be something right after lunch.
Yes, all right. Members of the jury, we're going to take our lunch break a few minutes early today. I will remind you not to discuss the case amongst yourselves in any fashion during the lunch break. There may be an item we have to take up outside of the jury's presence immediately after lunch. So I can't promise you exactly when we'll be resuming, but we'll let you know as soon as we're ready. You are excused for lunch at this time. You may be seated. Counsel, I'm going to ask you to report back to chambers a little before 1 to let me know what your plans are after lunch.
That's fine. Thank you.
All right. At this time, we're on the record outside the presence of the jury. We're going to begin by taking up a matter which was brought to the court's attention yesterday. That is, the court received a note from a jury bailiff that one of the jurors raised a question indicating that after Deputy Rimiker testified, the juror realised that the juror did not know him by name, but had been a juror in a jury trial some years ago in which Detective Rimiker was involved, and conscientiously raised the question whether that was a problem in this case. I presented the note to the attorneys, and at this time, before taking further action, the court wishes to hear the position of the parties on this matter. Mr. Kratz, I will allow you to go first, or excuse me, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Judge. Appearances of the state are Ken Kratz and Tom Fallon, special prosecutors. Our position on this, after having been made aware of this, is that the court individually questioned the juror regarding her specific knowledge and recollection of events involving that lawsuit. Most notably, what, if anything, she remembers of that suit. What, if anything, she remembers of the length of the trial, the number of witnesses. More importantly, what, if anything, she remembers regarding Detective Rimiker's involvement in the suit, whether he testified in the suit, whether she was called upon in her capacity as a juror to evaluate his credibility in that case. And if so, to what extent and what circumstances. Based on the information that we have, it was a case that centered on damages received by Mr. Remaker while in performance of his duties. Apparently, he was in a squad car and was rear-ended by another driver. So the question of liability was not prominent in that particular case, and rather was a question of damages. So if that is in effect the case, I think we should question the juror to see what, if anything, she remembers, and what, if any conclusions or opinions that she reached then that she may have now, in terms of being called upon to evaluate the credibility of Detective Remaker in this case. And most importantly, whether or not any information or opinions or knowledge that she would have gained from that lawsuit filed in 1999 would have any impact in her ability to perform her required duties as a juror in this particular case. I think it would be premature to excuse her for cause at this particular point without more information being made available to the court and the parties to make an informed assessment. And it may turn out that she has to be excused, and that would be fine with the state. But our position is that there should be a more adequate record made before that measure is indeed selected. Thank you.
Mr. Strang?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to start with the easiest points first. First, the juror did the right thing in bringing this to the court's attention with a note to the bailiff. Second, I have no information that the juror's mistake about knowing Detective Remaker was anything other than an innocent mistake, that she didn't recognize the name at the time, recognize the face when she saw him here. Again, I have no reason to question the good faith of the juror through the voir dire process or filling out the jury questionnaire. Those two easier points made, I think that the right thing for the court to do is to excuse Miss Temme, and I say that for several reasons. Once again, the easiest point first, we're almost 2 solid weeks of testimony into the trial, probably somewhere near a halfway point. Certainly of the state's case, I would think. And we have 4 alternate jurors, 4 extra jurors. So the cost to the parties or the court of discharging any one juror seems not very high, at least if we play the probabilities on how many alternates we really would need. We have got 4 spare jurors at the moment. Second, the problem this presents is a first for me. And although we have not had a chance to do any serious research on it, I would be surprised if we found much in the reported case law in Wisconsin or in any other jurisdiction. That gave a whole lot of guidance here. But the way I see it is this. We have a juror here who doesn't just know a witness in the case from outside of the courtroom. We have a juror who knows a witness in this case from filling a very special role in an earlier case, in which that witness also filled a special role. And by that I mean, the juror here is, in fact, and will be told, that she is a judge in this case, a judge of the facts. As important a judicial role as your honors, although in a separate realm. She also filled that role in an earlier case as a juror. This is a role that many citizens go their entire life and never get to fill. And others, once, twice, maybe 3 times in a lifetime, serve as a juror in our system. So it's an atypical role, and a serious one, and one that involves some artificiality in weighing evidence, in weighing the credibility of human beings who testify in a courtroom. One has to set aside what one knows, or thinks she knows, about facts from outside the courtroom. One has to follow specific instructions in how to weigh credibility. And one has to weigh credibility collaboratively with 11 other judges of the facts. So it's a very specialized, as I say, role that she's filled. As to Detective Remaker in the past, he too had a special role. He was not just a witness or a visitor to the courtroom whom she may have met during the trial, he was both witness and party, as I understand. In the earlier lawsuit, he probably testified. In ordinary life, at the diner, or at a dinner party, or at school, wherever we may meet people, we don't put one another under oath to engage in conversation and to decide what we believe and what we don't of what someone else tells us. And of course, if you are a witness in a trial, you are under oath. If you are a party as well, almost unavoidably your credibility is at stake and you have an interest, certainly, in the outcome of the litigation. That's why I say almost unavoidably your credibility is at stake. So both have had special roles. And while in day-to-day discourse, we might have a positive initial impression of a casual acquaintance, and come to change our mind about that when we get an insight or glimpse into character that causes us to question the initial good impression we had, or vice versa. This happens in everyday life. As a juror or a judge of the facts, this juror has committed her judgment to the credibility, to assessing the credibility of a witness here, based on his role as a sworn witness and a party on an earlier proceeding. It is human nature for any judge, including one, a judge of the law who wears a black robe, to be reluctant to reconsider or set aside judgments one's made. Wisconsin law recognizes this in a very, I concede, a loosely analogous way when, for example, if a case is reversed and remanded by an appellate court, sent back to a trial court, my recollection of Wisconsin law is that the parties have a renewed or revivified right to substitute on the judge of the law who first heard that case and now has had his or her judgment vacated or reversed and remanded. That has to be a tacit recognition that in the special role of judging, it is harder to set aside a considered judgment drawn from sworn testimony and under the well-crafted and instructed rules by which judges of the facts decide credibility of witnesses, and ultimately decide facts in a case. So I think that this is such an unlikely task for a juror to be able to undertake. That is, to set aside not just what do I know casually about this witness in this trial, but to set aside my experience with that witness as a sworn witness in an earlier lawsuit of which I was a judge of the facts. I think it's so unlikely that a juror will do that successfully. That this presents a question of objective bias. The closest case we have in Wisconsin clearly is State versus Kiernan, Kiernan, 227 2-736, a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision of about 7 or 8 years vintage, 1999, affirming a Court of Appeals decision which I think was reported at 226 or 221, 2D126. It's not a perfect match, but there we had jurors in trial number who had rejected the defense presented in trial number 1 by the same lawyer. And it was to be the very same defense in the second trial, both of them being operating while intoxicated cases. As I understand, Kiernan, the trial judge in trial number 2, refused to strike for cause jurors who had served in trial number 1 and rejected the same lawyer's presentation of the same defense. That was held to be a matter that made the jurors objectively biased in trial number 2. And the judgment was set aside by the Court of Appeals. And then the Court of Appeals, in turn, affirmed by the Supreme Court, as I understand the history of the case. Again, not a perfect match. Trial number 1 and trial number 2 were very close in time. In Kiernan, here we have a period of 6-7 years between trials. But in some ways, this is a stronger case for objective bias because we're talking about the same witness in trial number 1 and trial number 2, and a witness whose credibility clearly was at stake in trial number 1 and clearly will be at stake in trial 2 here. Detective Remaker is a member of Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. He is a detective. He was actively involved in this investigation. He may have been the most prolific report writer among the entire Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department retinue. He works directly for and is supervised by Lieutenant James Link, a critical figure in this case. And that is, Detective Remaker, was involved and testified to most of the significant searches in which physical evidence that the state has introduced, and will continue to seek to introduce, was seized and gathered. Moreover, Detective Remaker was one of just 2 law enforcement officers who have testified to date in this trial to statements of the accused. And indeed, there were only 3 witnesses who have offered any statements of the accused, if my memory serves. 1, a citizen, Bobby Dassey, and then 2 law enforcement officers, Sergeant Coburn and Detective Remaker. So his credibility is important here, probably quite important. Of the witnesses so far, the voice of Detective Remaker is the only witness voice these jurors heard in either party's opening statement, and that was in mine when I played part of what is now Exhibit 126. He's an important witness, because I think the issue primarily is objective bias. It makes no sense, in the view of the defense, to question the juror. If the issue were subjective bias, then the juror's answers would be dispositive, in all likelihood, unless the court had reason to question the veracity of the juror by demeanor or statements. But when the question is objective bias, as the scheme in Wisconsin for juror qualification is broken down, then it really doesn't matter if the juror denies a subjective bias. With objective bias, we say no, from a reasonable person's vantage point. This would not be considered an unbiased juror. So while with an objective bias issue we don't gain anything by questioning a juror, we certainly do put something at risk if we do that and the juror has not been accused. The things at risk are this, as I see. A, because we are mid-trial, we risk meddling in a subtle way with the deliberate process of this juror and potentially with the entire jury. Because this juror specifically will be instructed to set aside both her prior experience with Detective Remaker in a virtually identical role, sworn as a witness, and that she may not discuss with the other 11 jurors, if she's among the 12 who deliberate in this case, what she knows of or brings to the courtroom of Detective Remaker. Now, it's one thing to extract that kind of a process in voir dire before a jury is sworn. It is quite another, I think, mid-trial with a sworn jury and a member of that sworn jury to start parsing what can and cannot be considered in deliberating on the credibility of the witness. Now, understand me clearly, if she were to remain a member of this jury, she would have to be told that she cannot consider Detective Remaker's earlier role and that she cannot share that with these jurors. In this case, she would have to be told that. But the likelihood that she understands that and that doesn't chill her proper deliberative process or affect the deliberative process of the jury as a whole, it seems to me is low or questionable. So there is at least that risk. A, as I say. B, the risk of doing this is that the fact that she's been singled out, will either be understood by the jury or understood by her. And as being singled out, and as an instance that resulted in her being put under some special instructions that the other jurors are not under, and that presents its own obvious problems, I think. So I think for all of the reasons I have explained, this is not something the court ought to undertake. That is, questioning the juror is not something the court ought undertake. I also think that, on these circumstances, there is, at this point, on the information we have, reason to find objective bias and that the juror ought to be relieved of her further duties. With the thanks of the court and the parties because, again, she's done the right thing by reporting to the court of the problem. And that's the view of counsel from Mr. Avery.
Alright, well, I'm going to make a couple of comments at this time. First of all, with respect to the supply of alternative jurors we have. It's true we still have 4 jurors more than we need to deliberate, but we also have a case which is receiving a great deal of publicity. jurors can be inadvertently exposed to things that they should not hear. That could result in disqualification, and the court does not feel at this point, being less than halfway through the trial, that we have so many extra jurors that we can easily dispose of them. With respect to the issue of individually voir diring a juror in a situation like this, I believe that's exactly what the appeals court expect the trial court to do in this type of situation. For the court to, at this time, say that the juror should be disqualified on grounds of objective bias, I would be having to make a lot of assumptions about things that may or may not exist. The only thing the court knows at this point is that the juror apparently was involved in a civil case 67 years ago in which the witness was a party. I don't believe, based on the standards of objective bias as they have developed in the courts over recent years, that I can say on that fact alone no reasonable person in the juror's position could be a fair and impartial juror in this case. It may be, based on answers to further questions, that that's the situation, but I cannot find that at this point in the proceedings. The juror was conscientious enough to raise the issue on the juror's own initiative, and I am very reluctant to, on what would amount essentially to speculation, determine that without questioning the juror should be excused for cause on objective bias grounds at this stage in the proceedings. So I do believe it's necessary to conduct an individual voir dire of this particular juror. For that reason, the court is going to take a short break in the proceedings at this time. I have alerted the news media through the representative yesterday of the possibility that a portion of today's proceeding would not be open to cameras and audio and video coverage, for essentially the same reason as the court handled things the way when we went through the individual voir dire. When a juror's name can be known, where a juror's voice can be heard, those things are entitled not to be carried over the airwaves, and I'm going to therefore at this point take a break to make sure that there's no audio and video coverage of the proceedings going on. I will indicate that the court proceedings themselves will be open. The public and members of the media are more than welcome to be present in the courtroom, but the court will not be allowing camera coverage of the individual voir dire or any audio coverage in any fashion. Mr. Fallon?
Yes. On behalf of the state, I think it would be the court's intention and the defense as well if you would kindly ask the media not to reference the juror by name in the reporting of this issue, of this matter.
That's the next item I am addressing, and I'm making that request, that the media has been pretty good and responsible in regard to not identifying jurors by name. I'm sure they will honour the request in this case. In order to give the media an opportunity to be prepared for this short proportion of a trial, we'll take a short break at this time and check with the media room to make sure everything is in order. We'll resume probably in 5 minutes or less. At this time, we're back on the record outside the presence of a jury. I will indicate that during the break I spoke to a representative of the media to make sure that this individual voir dire portion of the proceedings was not being televised or the audio portion being broadcast in any way. I will indicate for the record that I did speak to an attorney for one of the media representatives over the noon hour to explain the reason for this brief portion of a trial not being accessible to audio and video coverage, and I believe the explanation would sue the attorney's satisfaction since I have not heard anything back. I also indicated to the media representative that I would grant their request to take a short break after the questioning of a juror is completed, so that the media can get their equipment back up and ready to go again. At this point, I should also indicate for the record that I met with counsel in chambers over the noon hour and informed counsel of the questions the court would be asking the juror, and took questions from counsel as to additional questions to ask. At this point, we'll have a juror brought in. You may be seated. I was going to invite you to sit in the front row, but I see you feel at home where you are. Miss Temme, the court has received a note from the bailiff with the question that you raised yesterday regarding Deputy Rimmaker. And first of all, I want to thank you for your conscientiousness in raising this issue for the court. And at this time, I would like to ask you a few questions in order to determine if the issue that you raised poses a problem in your service as a juror. At the outset, I want to let you know, for this portion of the proceedings, because I'm going to be questioning you, the camera have been turned off. This portion of the proceedings is not being carried on the air, or on the internet, or anywhere else, although the proceedings is, like all court proceedings, open to the public. As I understand, the note I received from the bailiff, you, before the start of the trial, did not recall David Rimmaker by name, but when you saw him testify, you recognised him as a party in a civil trial for which you served as a juror a number of years ago. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I did take the opportunity to look up his name on CCAP. I believe the trial involved was a civil trial that occurred in the year 2000. Does that sound correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's also my understanding that you brought this matter to the bailiff's attention at the break we took during Detective Rimacker's testimony.
Right.
Have you discussed your concerns with any other member of the jury, that is, this issue?
No.
You have not. Okay. I'm going to preface the next series of questions by making it clear that I'm not going to be asking you for, and I do not want you to say anything about your impressions of Mr. Rimacker's testimony in the case. I'm simply asking information about the previous case that you referred to. In the note I received from the bailiff, do you remember whether or not Mr. Rimacker testified in the case? Did he testify as a witness?
I don't remember.
Okay, I understand it. He was the plaintiff in the case, the person asking for damages,
Correct.
and the jury awarded him some damages, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you vote with the majority in that jury verdict, do you remember?
Yes.
Do you remember how long the trial was, approximately?
I believe it was 1 week.
1 week?
Approximately 1 week.
And do you recall anything, for example, about the number of witnesses in the case?
No, I don't.
Okay, and if I understand it correctly, you can't say for sure whether or not Mr. Rimacker actually testified in the case?
I can't remember. I can't say for sure.
Would your experience as a juror in that case cause you to give any more or less weight to his testimony in this case?
No.
You indicated that you have not discussed this matter with any other members of the jury, is that correct?
Yes.
Will you be able, during the remainder of this trial, including deliberations, not to tell any other members of the jury about this tie you have with Mr. Rimacker?
Of course.
Counsel, it's my understanding that the parties may request a sidebar at this time. Miss Temme, I would like to ask you just a few follow-up questions. You have told me some things that you didn't remember about the case. Can you tell me what you do remember about it, other than the fact Mr. Rimacker was a plaintiff?
What I remember about it is a lot of discussion about the lower left lumbar of the back and that it involved an accident down on the I system with a couple of other vehicles. That's about it.
Do you remember anything about the witness who testified at the trial?
No, I don't.
Do you remember, at the conclusion of the trial, how you felt about it?
I felt that the plaintiff should receive some monetary value for the problems he was having.
Okay. Do you remember anything about the amount of damages that was awarded?
I'm guessing, but I think it was medical bills and maybe like $100,000.
Do you remember if you were in agreement or not with the amount of damages that were awarded?
I was in agreement.
Is there anything else you can tell us that you remember about your experience as a juror in that case?
I listened to the information from both sides. I know there was a lot of medical information provided. I think that's why I remember the lower left lumbar of the back information, but it was a good experience.
Is there anything else at all about your experience as a juror in that case that you feel could have any effect whatsoever on your service as a juror in this case?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to excuse you at this time. I forgot one last thing I was going to talk to her about, so I'm going to have the bailiff bring her back out. You may be seated. Miss Temme, one thing I forgot that I wanted to tell you, and it sounds like you followed it so far, but I want to make sure that you do not discuss either the fact that you were a juror in that case, or any of the questions I asked you here, or any of the answers you gave, with any other member of the jury in this case.
Of course.
Very well. You are excused now. Alright, counsel, we're going to take a very short break at this time for me to give the media the break I promised them, and then in 5 minutes we'll go back on the record outside the presence of the jury. At this time, we're back on the record outside the presence of the jury. I will hear from the parties at this time concerning their position on the juror following the voir dire. Mr. Fallon.
Yes. Thank you, Judge. Quite frankly, we were not surprised by any of the answers obtained from the juror here. I have extensive notes from the jury selection process in terms of the information that we obtained from her and many notes regarding her demeanor. She was questioned about her prior jury experience. She said that at the time, it was an interesting, good experience, much like she described it today. She describes me as an individual who doesn't take things, I should say, she takes things as she sees them or as she finds them. And I think it's important to highlight the fact that Here it is, 2007, and this trial was at least 6 years ago, perhaps close to 7 years ago. And when asked about that, does she remember about the case? I found it rather telling that all she could focus and clearly remember was the lower left lumbar as being a point of interest to the particular trial at hand. And if she doesn't recall, equally important whether Mr. Remaker in that case testified. I think it's also a telling fact because ordinarily you would expect the plaintiff in a civil case, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if further review suggests that Detective Remaker did testify. But she doesn't have a clear recollection of that particular incident or his testimony or anything else about the case other than the injury to the lower left lumbar and how significant or severe it was. While some may argue that thousands of dollars and a special damages for medical bills and perhaps $100,000, or maybe she's thinking $100,000 total for all the other injuries associated for an accident like that. It's not an overwhelming amount of money. She indicated she voted in favor, thought the plaintiff carried the day. But there was nothing about the particular process or the deliberation or the evaluation of the testimony of evidence and all that, which is of critical interest to us here today, that suggests that she couldn't perform that same function today. And more importantly, there was no indication in any of the information provided by her that she would not be able to perform that function today in this case, and setting aside or disregarding any of what occurred in 2000. And I think it's a critical fact here. Is there a chance or likelihood? I don't mean a chance, but I mean a realistic likelihood, a realistic chance that something about the case would interfere or cause her to unduly sway the evaluation and the evaluation of the credibility of Detective Remaker. And we saw no indication of that in the particular voir dire of the juror. So we're not bringing a motion for a cause. I don't think there's a sufficient basis to strike for cause on an objective bias because she happened to be a juror in a case 6 years ago. And the fact that one of the witnesses in this particular case was a plaintiff, again, doesn't seem to be that significant a point or a fact with this juror. Again, as I said, there's nothing that we learned today that would seriously cause us to suggest that she could not perform the duties in this case. So we do not have an objection.
Mr. Strang?
The defense moves to strike the juror for cause. We adhere to all of my earlier comments, and I will add now, after hearing the juror, something on subjective bias and something more on objective bias. The court, of course, has the province of assessing the juror's credibility and demeanor. I thought it worthy of note that the juror, who is middle-aged, that's going to get me in trouble with someone, but she certainly is a young person, not an elderly person, and is describing a trial that, let's assume, happened in 2000. If it happened in 2000, it's really not so long ago. That's the year that President Bush first was elected. That's not a long time ago, and professes here today not to remember, one way or the other, whether the plaintiff in the lawsuit was a witness at some point during what she thinks was about a 1-week trial. It's worth raising, just as a subjective matter, but I continue to see this primarily as a matter of objective bias. And what I can add to my comments earlier is just the exclamation point that when we have sitting in this jury at a time when we have ample extra jurors and opportunity to err on the side of caution, when we have someone sitting as a juror who previously has voted to award $100,000 to a witness in this case, there is not the reasonable appearance of impartiality and fairness. That just simply doesn't look fair. So if the court concludes that subjectively she's not biased, I think there's a real objective bias concern here, and that she ought to be relieved of further duty as a juror in this case.
All right. First of all, with respect to the court's finding in this matter, I find this particular juror to be very credible for a number of reasons. Probably goes back to my recollection of her answers during individual voir dire, which I agree with the state were similar to what I heard today. She certainly didn't have to alert the court to the fact that she had been on a jury involving one of the witnesses 7 years ago. I have given no instructions to the jurors that would require them to report that type of information, at least specifically. I have instructed them that if they were exposed to any reports or communications from other parties, they should report it, but she did it on her own, and I believe she did so conscientiously. Given the fact, I find no reason she would have to be untruthful when she tells the court today that she simply has no recollection of remembering that Mr. Rimmaker testified at the trial during which she served as a juror. That is not the same as saying she believes he did not testify. She simply doesn't remember. If she doesn't remember that he testified, there doesn't appear to be a serious danger that somehow, because she found him credible as a witness in that trial, she would be more likely to find him credible as a witness in this trial. She doesn't even have a recollection of him testifying. Her most vivid recollections of that trial are related more to the injuries. The fact she feels that the person, as a plaintiff, was injured and was entitled to damages, and she went along with an award that was given by the rest of the jurors in that case. She indicated to the court that she did not believe her experience as a juror in that case would have any impact on her ability to be fair and impartial in this case, and I am not aware of any information that would call that into question. In terms of objective bias, the question boils down to whether a reasonable person in the individual juror's position could be impartial. That is, I have to ask, could somebody be impartial in her position? She didn't remember the individual's name at the time of the original individual voir dire, and I saw nothing in her demeanour to suggest that she was somehow favourably inclined towards Detective Rimmaker because he was a plaintiff in a prior suit. It appears she simply participated in the award because she thought the plaintiff in that case was entitled to the award. I just don't see anything nor any reason why someone who was a juror in a case 6 or 7 years ago would, of necessity, be unable to be fair and impartial in a case such like this. She's an intelligent person. I think she can separate and tell the difference between the two, and I don't think, more importantly, that there's any particular motivation, simply because she has participated in a civil trial that long ago. Any objective reason why she should be more or less inclined to believe him in his testimony in this case, so the court is going to deny the motion to strike this juror for cause. Counsel, is there anything else to take up before we bring in the jury and resume with the next witness?
Just one matter, Judge. The next witness, like some law enforcement officers that come before the court, is a member of a Metro drug unit. As part of his responsibilities, and is actively involved in undercover narcotics investigations. He's asked this court, although we believe that his audio poses no threat to either himself or his investigations, that the court direct that video of this officer not be taken. He is a relatively short officer. I have spoken to Mr. Buting about that, and obviously, audio of this officer will be permitted, but pursuant to statute, Judge, I believe the court has the authority, and I would ask this officer, and I think in this case, this officer alone, that videotape not be taken of his testimony.
Mr. Buting,
I have no problem with that. That's fine.
I assume that's sufficient. If I simply direct the cameraman to just focus on the attorneys or the board or something else, that they just be instructed not to show the camera on the witness.
Anything else, Judge, that would be just fine.
All right, I think that should be sufficient to most narrowly meet the state's request, while still allowing for the public coverage of the trial. So, Mr. Cameraman, I assume you can follow that directive, and although I can't make eye contact with whoever is behind the glass, I will ask the same of the cameraman in the media room. Is that you?
No, I'm a reporter, but I'm standing up and I would like to make a record to the court. Our attorney from WISN-TV, Attorney Flynn, has left a message in the bag for the court. He would like to be heard on this issue.
On this issue here?
Yes, involving the DCI agent.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll take a short break, and I will take a phone call in chambers and see if anything further is necessary.
Thank you.
At this time, I will indicate for the record, and were outside the presence of a jury, I spoke to Attorney Matthew Flynn, who represents WISN in Milwaukee. I believe his call was prompted in anticipation of the court completely prohibiting coverage of the trial during the testimony of the next witness. When I explained to him that I felt the needs of the media and the needs of the court could be accommodated by allowing the proceedings to continue to be televised during the testimony of the next witness, but simply instructing the cameraman not to show his face, Mr. Flynn indicated that was satisfactory to he and his client, so that's what the court will do. I have received a nod from the cameraman that he understands the instructions, and with that we'll bring in the jury at this time and then allow the state to call its next witness.
That's fine. Thank you, Judge.
You may be seated. Members of the jury, before we begin, I just want you to rest assured that the attorneys and I did not take a 3-hour lunch today. We had a number of matters to address that had to be addressed outside the presence of the jury. I believe we are ready to go now, and at this time we're going to have the state call its next witness.
Thank you, Judge. The state will call Gary Steier to the stand. I have 2 exhibits, Janet.
Raise your right hand. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record. Gary Steier. Steier.
Mr. Steier, how are you employed?
I'm a special investigator with Calumet County's Sheriff's Department.
Do you also have special responsibilities with a multi-jurisdictional organization?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe that just briefly, please?
I'm assigned to the 4-County Drug Unit, Lake Winnebago Drug Unit.
With Calumet County, what are your responsibilities?
Special investigator position is 50% investigations, 50% Lake Winnebago Area Metropolitan Enforcement Drug Group Unit, investigations into the 4 counties around Lake Winnebago as far as drug investigations, and then 50% other investigations pertaining into Calumet County.
Mr. Steier, in your general investigative responsibilities, were you asked on November 5th of 2005 to proceed to the Avery salvage yard?
Yes, I was.
And that first evening, that is, on the 5th of November, did you actively participate in the first search? What we have come to know as a sweep of several residences on the property.
Yes.
Can you describe that just briefly for us, please?
Myself and Detective Remaker were assigned to execute the search warrant on Stephen Avery's property, specifically looking for Teresa Halbach. I believe we were the 2 investigators that entered the residence and did an initial sweep looking for Teresa Halbach.
As I understand, Investigator Steier, that through the rest of that week, that is, between the 5th and the 12th of November, you were actively involved in other search as well as investigative efforts in this case.
Yes.
In fact, Investigator Steier, after the completion of that first week's worth of investigation, you continued to be asked to perform investigative functions in this case. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
I will now direct your attention to March 1st and 2nd of 2006. Ask if you were once again asked to participate or cooperate in investigative efforts.
Oh, yes, I was.
Could you tell the jury on March 1st and 2nd what you were asked to do?
On March 1st and 2nd, I was asked to be the evidence custodian for the search warrant when it was executed, more particularly to the garage of the residence of Stephen Avery.
Directing your attention first to March 1st, what were your responsibilities in searching Stephen Avery's garage?
My responsibilities were to collect or make sure that the evidence collected in the garage was packaged, and an officer who discovered or who had collected the items and had dated that a date and time that that item was collected and that all the evidence was taken out of the garage and made sure that the chain of custody was intact.
Do you know an agent with the Division of Criminal Investigation named Kevin Heimerl?
Oh, sure do.
Was he also involved in both search and collection efforts on March 1st and 2nd?
Yes, he was.
On March 1st, Investigator Steier, upon a search of the garage of Stephen Avery, was any particular item of interest located?
There were several items that were collected that were of interest. 2 of the items were bullet fragments collected inside the garage.
These are the bullet fragments that I'm going to ask you, at least for the next several questions. Direct your attention on March 1st, that is, the first day of the 2-day search project or procedure. Could you tell us how that fragment was located and what you personally did after that fragment was located?
Day 1 of the search warrant, a bullet fragment was located. The item was located by Agent Heimerl and was collected by myself. Day 2 of the search warrant, a second bullet fragment was also located by Agent Heimerl and was collected by Detective Remiker.
Judge, just so the record is clear, as to the actions of Agent Heimerl, he's going to be testifying. It would be hearsay. That's why I'm not objecting, but he is coming.
All right, thank you.
He will be our next witness, and thank you, counsel. I'm showing you what has been marked for identification as exhibit number 276 and 277. Are you able to identify or recognize those exhibits?
Oh, yes. The exhibit with the plastic bag with initials GS was collected by myself.
That's 276.
That's correct.
And was that found on the first day or the second day?
It was found on March 1st.
Okay. Do you remember, generally, within the garage, where that bullet fragment was located?
Would be in the northwest corner of the garage.
I'm going to show you, investigator, what has been previously received as exhibit number 108. Ask if this computer diagram assists you in describing to the jury where this bullet fragment was found.
The evidence photograph marker number 9.
As far as the collection, packaging, and then taking control of that first bullet fragment, could you explain once again for the jury who it was that found the fragment, which I'm sure we'll hear about, but then who both packaged and took control of?
The bullet fragment, exhibit 276, in the paper bag was located by Agent Heimerl and collected by myself. All the photographs inside the trailer were done by Agent Heimerl.
You mean inside the garage?
I'm sorry, inside the garage,
Just so the jury knows, there was another search going on inside of Mr. Avery's trailer at the same time. Is that right?
That's correct. We were divided into teams, a team of 5. We were assigned the garage and another team was assigned inside the trailer at the same time.
Okay, now, the next day, that is, on March 2nd, directing your attention to exhibit number 277. Where was that found?
That would have been located on the evidence photograph tent marker 23A.
After its detection, again, which we're going to hear about in just a couple minutes, what happened with that bullet fragment?
The bullet was turned over to me from Detective Remiker.
After taking custody, I understand on 2 separate days, but of each of these items of evidence, Could you describe for the jury what was done with them? What happened after you retained possession of them?
The items were packaged or were collected in a package and turned over to me, and then evidence tape surrounding the package was placed on the item collected. And then from there, the items were transported to a trailer, which was housing the other items that were collected from the safe.
I think it's 125, Mr. Fallon. Finally, Investigator Steier, were you familiar with a log? That is, a check-in and check-out procedure or document that was being utilized on those days?
I was aware that there was a log being taken of our entry and exit times and out of the garage and the surrounding area.
Now, the garage and the surrounding area, are those the same logs or the same kind of place?
Day 1, the log reflected inside the trailer, inside the garage. Day 2, reflected the garage and the evidence tape, which was just outside the garage.
All right. Either on March 1st or March 2nd, had you witnessed either Lieutenant James Link or Sergeant Andrew Colburn come inside of the garage itself?
No.
If either Lieutenant Link or Sergeant Colburn had come inside of the garage, is that something that you would have noticed?
Probably. It was only 5 or 6 of us inside the garage at that time.
All right. And Mr. Fallon, as soon as he finds it, it's going to show you the actual log. Is it 125, Counsel? Is that the right log?
There's 3 possibilities, Counsel. 125, 147, and 146.
Perhaps Mr. Buden can... We're going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 146 and 147. First of all, I will ask if you recognize those documents.
I have not seen these particular documents, no.
Well, then, what I'm going to do is go by your independent recollection. Do you know if Lieutenant Link had, on either day, come inside of the outer perimeter? That is, the outer check-in area?
To answer your question, the day 1, no, Lieutenant Link did not enter the garage area. I believe these records are for the trailer, not for the garage.
All right. But what I'm asking, though, is do you know if on either day Lieutenant Link entered what would be the outer perimeter, not the garage itself, but was he in the general vicinity of those search efforts?
Yes, on day 2, he was near the tape line of the evidence, but not inside the garage.
All right. And I guess that's the point that I'm asking you. Although inside of where the general public couldn't get, he wasn't in the garage itself. Is that your testimony?
Yes, sir.
At any time, Investigator Steier, did you see Lieutenant Link provide any other officer who may have come into the garage with any kind of evidence or anything to secrete or to plant or to hide in there?
No, ma'am.
My last question is, if that would have happened, is that something that you would have seen?
I probably would have noticed something unusual. But to answer the question, I don't know if I would have actually been able to determine that.
We have now found exhibit number 125, which, in fact, is that outer perimeter log. Is that something that you do recognize?
Yes.
And you notice Lieutenant Link's name on that outer perimeter log, is that correct? It's on page 1.
Yes.
All right.
For March 2nd.
And recognizing, Judge, that we are going to hear about the discovery and photography of exhibits number 276 and 77. I still will at this time move their admission.
Any objection?
No.
All right, those exhibits are admitted.
That's all I have of this witness. Thank you, Judge.
All right, you are excused, sir.
No.
Oh, sorry, jumping the gun.
Not so fast.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. Is it detective or investigator?
Investigator.
Okay, Investigator Steier, your involvement, you had some involvement in this case back in November of 05?
Yes, I did.
During that week when it first started, right?
Yes.
And you work for Calumet Sheriff's Department, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure that you were aware that on the very, very first day, November 5th of 2005, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department had decided to turn over this investigation to Calumet, right?
That is correct.
Because of this possible conflict of interest over the fact that Mr. Avery here was suing Manitowoc County, right?
That is also correct.
And then after the property was held for that week, November 5th through the 12th, Manitowoc didn't really have much else to do in this investigation. To your knowledge, did they initially?
After that, no. Not that I believe so.
So it was primarily Calumet, represented by Mr. Uyghur, who's not here at the moment, and DCI, led by Mr. Fassbender, who were running the investigation of this case, as far as you knew.
Yes.
Okay, so for 4 months go by, and now we're up to March 1st. 4 months when Manitowoc County had really had nothing to do with this case. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Suddenly, there's another search warrant at Mr. Avery's trailer and garage, and we see Manitowoc back in the case. Isn't that right?
As far as I know, yes.
You have all the logs up there with you, or just one? Oh, God, wait. You have all the logs up there with you, or just one?
I just have the second, I believe.
Okay, let me have that one, please. Now, the first day, this was actually sort of a 2-day search of those properties, right? First and second?
That's correct.
And somebody with your department maintained overall security of that scene during that time?
Yes.
24 hours?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, we're talking over each other here. And those people who maintain security of that scene, do you know whether they were Manitowoc or Calumet?
They were Calumet.
All right. And they were maintaining a log of people who would come and go from the property during this 2-day search, right?
Yes.
And that's when Exhibit 147 is. If you would take a look at that, it appears to be a log that was being kept by one of your colleagues of everybody that came and went, right?
Let me check. Yes.
Okay. And do you see Detective Lang's name? To make it easier for you, direct your attention to the bottom of the page, Lieutenant Lang. I believe that...
My glasses. Yes, I do.
I shows Lieutenant Lang arriving at 1810, right?
That is correct.
And there does not appear to be a similar log like this other one, that's Exhibit 125, that's dated March 2nd. Have you seen one like this for March 1st?
Yes, there is a
Okay.
log with this for March 1st.
Okay, so maybe we just haven't found it. Exhibit 125 is a different kind of log. It's more specific to location on that property. Would that be fair?
Yes.
It specifically says garage and roped off area or something, right?
Yes, roped off area.
And do you see Lieutenant Lang's name on that?
I do.
Do you actually remember him being there?
I do.
Do you remember him passing out food and drinks? Yes or no?
Oh, nummy, no.
He wouldn't do that. He's a lieutenant, right?
He may have been passing out food or drinks. I just can't recall at this time.
Okay, do you know who asked Manitowoc County to rejoin this investigation on March 1st and 2nd?
Objection, irrelevant judge.
Mr. Putin.
I think it's directly relevant. It's been a central part of this case.
Is there still a conflict on March 1st and 2nd? That's my objection, Your Honor.
Well, you can ask him if he knows. I will allow it.
Do you know?
Could you repeat the question, please?
You may not know, that's fine. But I'm just asking if you know who asked. Well, let me ask you this. Who asked you to come be this evidence custodian?
Investigator Mark Wieger.
Okay. Do you know whether Mr. Wieger or Mr. Fassbender invited Manitowoc County back into this investigation so that they would be at the scene of this search of Mr. Avery's trailer and garage on March 1st and 2nd?
Do I know that they asked Manitowoc County?
Do you know who asked them?
Do I know who specifically? No.
Okay. But Mr. Wiegert and Mr. Fassbender, as far as you know, were the leaders of the investigation still at that time.
That's correct.
And Mr. Kratz asked if you noted Sergeant Colburn or Lieutenant Link in the garage area itself. You didn't at the time have any particular concern about the fairness or objectivity of either of those two officers, did you?
No, I did not.
As of March 1st and 2nd, you didn't know, or did you, that Lieutenant Lang had been deposed as a witness in the Avery lawsuits?
No, I did not know at that time.
So there was nothing about those two officers that would have put you on guard or to watch out, make sure they don't do something like plant evidence, right?
That's correct.
That's all I have of this witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kratz, any redirect?
Not of this witness, Judge.
All right, very well. The witness is now excused. Mr. Kratz, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Judge. And just for the record, we're not asking for any special indulgence from this point forward from the media, and I will call Mr. Kevin Heimerl to the stand.
Thank you.
If you would raise your right hand. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Kevin Heimerl, Heimerl.
Mr. Heimerl, how are you employed, sir?
I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation.
How long have you been a special agent?
3 years.
Prior to that employment responsibility, did you have other law enforcement experience?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe that for the jury, please?
I worked for the Columbia County Sheriff's Department for approximately 14 years. I began as a non-sworn jailer and dispatcher for approximately 1.5 years, then worked in a uniform patrol deputy sworn position for approximately 1.5 years. And I then was promoted to a detective investigator position for the remainder of 11 to 12 years.
During November of 2005, did you work for the Division of Criminal Investigation?
Yes, I did.
And is one of your colleagues, Special Agent Fassbender?
Yes.
Sometime after the 5th of November 2005, were you asked to participate in an investigation at the Avery salvage property?
Yes, I was.
And let's start with an overview. First of all, what days were it that you were actually on that property, if you recall, that week?
I was initially assigned to assist with the investigation on Sunday, November 6th, I believe it was, and I remained active and involved in the initial investigation there at the scene for approximately the first week.
All right. Were there specific responsibilities that you were given? And if so, who were those directed to you by?
Yes, I was given assignments and responsibilities by the lead investigator, Special Agent Fassbender, or Detective Wiegert.
The first day that you were there, I think you said was Sunday, the 6th of November. Could you tell the jury what your responsibilities were that day?
My first assignment was to follow up on an investigative lead, and I traveled into the city of Manitowoc to interview a citizen regarding a previous contact that citizen had with Teresa Hallbach.
Now, I think you are the first law enforcement officer that we have heard about that was actually doing interviews of people off-site. In other words, off the Avery property. Was that a responsibility or series of responsibilities that you were aware that other law enforcement officials had as well as you?
I was aware that other investigators were doing interviews elsewhere.
Are you familiar with the term neighborhood canvass?
Yes, I am.
What does that mean?
Neighborhood canvass is something that is quite often done in investigations of all magnitude, if you will. And it essentially involves contacting all individuals who reside in homes or work in businesses within the immediate vicinity of the crime, to make contact with all of those people and interview them to see if they had information that may be relevant to the investigation or may assist in the investigation.
During that first week of involvement in this investigation, were many of your responsibilities involving those kind of interviews, the neighborhood canvasses?
Yes, it was.
Agent Heimerl, I am going to direct your attention to Monday, the 7th of November, and ask if you were on the Avery property on the 7th.
Yes, I was.
On the 7th of November, do you recall having contact with and actually taking control of a burn barrel located outside of Mr. Avery's trailer?
Yes, I do.
Let me show you what's been received as Exhibit 51. Can you tell us what we're looking at here, please?
This is a steel burn barrel.
Does this look familiar to you?
Yes, it does.
What steel burn barrel is this?
This is a steel burn barrel that is essentially in the front yard of Stephen Avery's trailer.
After initially being discovered, were you asked to take control of or begin what's commonly referred to as the processing of this piece of evidence?
Yes.
Describe what that entails for the jury, please.
At the time, I was present at the command post and was contacted by Agent Fassbender and informed that a burn barrel in front of Stephen Avery's residence had been found to potentially contain items of evidence. Myself and Special Agent James Seiler were assigned to walk down to the trailer, meet with the law enforcement officers that had discovered it, and to begin, basically to secure it and to begin documenting.
All right. Now, evidence this burn barrel included eventually was taken off-site or to a central repository or a central place where it was held. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Do you know where evidence in this case, after it was taken off-site, was retained?
I believe it was either transferred to the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. In some instances, I believe that some items went directly to the state crime lab. I don't specifically know where this one went.
All right. Agent Heimerl, were you also, later in the week, made aware of an area behind Mr. Avery's garage, which has been referred to as a burn area or a burn pit?
I was told of it.
The questions that I have of you, though, were after processing. That is, after that burn area was processed by agents of DCI Crime Lab and others. In the weeks thereafter, were you asked to assist in examination of the contents of that particular burn area?
Yes, I was.
So that the jury knows what we're talking about, and although a little bit out of order, we'll be hearing from witnesses about this, but do you recognize exhibit number 47?
I have seen that photograph before, yes.
Now, the items seized therefrom, in other words, the items that were recovered from this burn area, you mentioned that you participated in examination of. Could you tell us where that occurred, please?
Yes, it occurred on two separate occasions. The first occasion was at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison, and the second occasion that occurred here at the Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
Could you describe just generally, and again, we're going to hear more specifically about this, but to get your part of the case in, for lack of a better term, can you describe generally what you did or what you were asked to do in that examination?
Yeah. Myself and several other investigators were given the assignment or the responsibility to examine all of the debris that was removed from the burn area or the burn pit. And that debris was collected by other investigators and was packaged and ultimately brought to the State Crime Laboratory in Madison. There was there we set up a processing station, if you will, which simply involved tabletop platforms that were covered with tarps. We had all of this loose debris material that was a mixture of soil and ash and burnt items. We would take a quantity of it and place it on the table in front of you on the tarp, and using various instruments, begin sifting through it and layering it out very thinly in front of you and visually examining the material, attempting to locate any items that you feel may be items of evidence, such as human remains, bone material, items of metal that you feel may in some way, shape, or form be related as an item of evidence.
Let me ask you, Agent Heimerl, as part of your law enforcement training, in addition to general investigative training, do you have any specific or specialized training in areas of arson or arson investigations?
Yes, I do.
Can you just generally tell us about that training and experience, please?
My assignment at the Department of Justice, DCI, is in the Arson Bureau. My primary assignment is to conduct fire arson investigations, and I have received rather extensive training through both at local, state, and national levels in fire investigation aspects and determining the origin and cause of fire incidents. But that also includes fatal fire investigations. I believe that some of probably the most important experience or training that I have received has been on the job training, if you will, in processing fire death scenes where people have perished in fires. Our office is frequently called to fatal fire investigations, and we often have to recover human remains from the fire scene.
All right. So you are familiar with this process. Its term I call sifting and sorting, but that's a clumsy term. But is that generally part of the process of what you engaged in this case?
Yes, it is. And you're exactly right. There are different terms to use. And in some cases, sifting is actually done with sifting screens. In this case, we did not use the sifting screens, but it was more just a thin layering out and a visual examination. If an item strikes you out as a possibly being something that you may need to collect, it may be brushed clean or cleaner to remove some of the debris that's attached to it to allow for a better examination.
During this examination process, and by the way, I would ask you to look at some of the photographs that are in front of you. I want you to first find Exhibit 273. It is one of the last pictures, I think, that we've given you. Tell me if you recognize that, please.
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This is a photograph of several individuals, to include Investigator Wiegert, myself. I recognize Special Agent Rodney Pivito. And this was taken in the basement of the State Crime Laboratory as we were going through this processing of the debris.
The processing, or the sifting or sorting activity, is that a quick process, or does that take a lot of time? Is it time intensive?
It is very time and labor intensive. It's a very tedious process. It cannot be done quickly, otherwise you miss things because it's all being done visually. And in this instance, this task was completed over the course of 4 full days.
Do you know if that was under the direction or supervision of any other professionals, any degreed professionals?
Yes.
Who's that, do you know?
Dr. Leslie Leisenberg, a forensic anthropologist for the state of Wisconsin, was present on 2 of the days. And in my opinion, Special Agent Pivito is one of the leaders in this field who was present as well.
We'll actually hear from him and his qualifications later in the trial. Judge, but I appreciate the objection.
I'll sustain the objection with respect to the comment about the individual's qualifications.
Thank you, Judge.
Move to strike.
And I move to strike that portion of the answer.
That's fine. Thank you. I'm showing you Exhibit 274, just another photo of the same event. What is this that we're looking at here?
Again, this is a similar process occurring. However, I believe this occasion is probably in April of 2006 here at Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
All right. I will go back to the other exhibit then, since it included you, or at least a photo of you. You said during this process, you looked for not only items of human remains, bone fragments to be specific, but also non-human items. Is that correct?
Correct.
During the sifting and sorting process, did you individually detect and observe any of these non-human items that were within those burn area remains or materials that were collected?
Yes, I did.
Do you have an independent recollection of what it is that you found?
Yes.
Could you tell the jury about that, please?
As I look at this photograph, if I could explain further, I see an object, a black rectangular object, which is a magnet. And one of the tools that we used in this process as well was a magnet to move it through the debris, to pull out all non-combustible metal objects. We would then remove all of these items from the magnet and visually examine those items, looking for additional items that may be, I'm sorry.
I just got one more bag to open, and I'll be done with that noise. Sorry.
Let's do the bag first, and then we'll continue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, all of the metallic objects that stuck to the magnet were taken, then removed, and they were visually examined to determine if they were potentially of evidentiary value.
Now, these metallic items, or at least some of the items that you found, were you able to visually identify them? In other words, to visually make a determination of what these items were?
Yes.
Could you describe the kinds of items that you found, please?
Well, there were many different types and variety of metal objects, but to include hardware, screws, nails, wires, many wires from what appeared to be from tires. We found rivets, clothing rivets, normally associated with denim jeans. I believe that we were able to find and identify teeth from a zipper, ammunition casings, shell casings, a large variety of different types of objects.
The items that were associated with clothing, the clothing rivets and the zippers, or parts of the zippers, were these metallic items mixed within the human remains or the other items that you were examining?
Yes.
Mr. Wiegert, have we marked that exhibit?
Just working on it. It will take just 2 seconds here.
Show it to Mr. Buting first, please.
279.
Mr. Wiegert is going to hand you what's been marked for identification as exhibit number 279. Tell us what that is, please.
That appears to be a clothing rivet, similar to what I described that you would find on a pair of denim pants, for instance.
And was this clothing rivet that was identified, easily identified, or at least identified with writing right on the rivet?
Yes.
And what does that rivet say?
The rivet is stamped Daisy Fuentes.
I'm going to ask you to look at exhibit number 275. Ask if you recognize that photo.
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This is a photograph of one of those very rivets that has been cleaned and brushed to remove the debris.
Now that we're showing the jury, are you able to read the inscription on that clothing rivet?
Yes,
What does it say?
it says Daisy Fuentes.
At least 275 actually shows the inscription or lettering, Daisy Fuentes, in two different places, one on either side of the rivet. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Heimerl, these non-human remains, or those metallic items, after they were sorted, were they removed from what were thought to be human remains?
Yes.
Do you know what was done with them then?
If I recall correctly, there were metallic objects that would be found that investigators felt relatively confident were not going to be items of evidence. Whether they were wires from a tire, we would collect those separately and place them back into a plastic bag, and it would then be returned into the original container that the material was contained in.
I see. Were some items that investigators believe had specific evidentiary value removed or separately packaged?
Yes, sir.
And would something like exhibit number 275 or 274, the actual item, or 279, the actual item itself, the rivet, would be one of those items that would be separately packaged?
Yes.
How many law enforcement individuals do you believe were involved in this sorting or sifting process that you were personally accompanied?
Course of the first 2 days in Madison, I believe there was approximately 8 or 9. On the second 2 days here in Chilton, I believe there were a similar number.
All right. That's all for this witness. I meant the investigator and not you, Judge. I'm sorry. Mr. Heimerl, do you recall also being asked to participate in investigative efforts on March 1st and 2nd of 2006?
Yes, I do.
And tell the jurors, if you would, what it was that you were asked to do on those 2 days.
I was asked to assist with the search of Stephen Avery's garage.
And did you, in fact, assist in that process?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the jury what your role in that search project was, please?
I worked with several other investigators. We worked as a team to search the garage. Initially to document the garage through photographs and video, and to search the entire garage and contents for any additional items of potential evidence, to document the location of those items through photography and measurements, and to package, label, and preserve those items of evidence for ultimate retention by the Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
And did you do that on the 1st and 2nd?
Yes, we did.
Stephen Avery's property, or at least his curtilage, includes a trailer and a garage. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And in which of those buildings did you have responsibility?
In the detached garage.
Let's talk about that search effort, or March 1st and 2nd, the search of the garage. First of all, could you describe the interior of the garage? How did it look to you?
It was very cluttered, with a large amount of miscellaneous property, a lot of it associated with automobile repair and just general garage store items. It was not clean. It was quite dusty.
Who performed the photography on the inside of the garage on that 2-day search?
I did.
I'm going to have you take a look at an item in front of you. Exhibit 265. Tell the jury what that is, please.
The photograph that I took on the evening of March 1st, after certain items of evidence had been found, or areas on the floor had been documented with a grease pencil and then subsequently labeled with those photo markers. And this is a general overview photograph of the interior of the garage, standing, which you can see outside the open overhead garage door.
And the very foreground, what is that we see that's white?
A snowbank.
All right. So this is actually taken outside the threshold of the garage itself. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, these yellow markers, again, what significance, if any, do those have, at least in this photo?
The yellow markers in the rear of the garage were placed near white circles that were on the concrete floor when we entered the garage on that day. I believe that they were as a result of a previous search. And some of those additional markers were identifying areas that we felt may be areas of potential further examination based on an evidence process that was completed under dark. And finally, one additional evidence marker in the foreground was identifying the location of a specific item of evidence that had already been found when this photograph was taken.
We will talk about that in just a minute. There are some other photos I just want you to identify, and we will talk about them. What's Exhibit 266, please?
That is a photograph of a Blackjack brand creeper, a piece of equipment normally used by someone who wants to work under an automobile.
To the immediate right of the creeper, do you see a piece of equipment?
Yes, I do.
And do you know what that piece of equipment is?
The green cylindrical item with a wheel I assume you're referring to is an air compressor.
We'll talk about that much more in just a moment. But tell us what Exhibit 267 is, please.
That's a photograph of a plastic jug with a label identifying it as a paint thinner.
As part of this search, were you asked to identify either cleaning products or items of or having properties that could mask or destroy evidence?
Yes.
And were paint thinner and bleach and other reagents like that the type of items that you were asked to identify and photograph?
Yeah.
What's Exhibit 268? Oh, before we get to that, I'm sorry. You had mentioned previously that there was a tent or an evidence tent number or a marker that was closer in the foreground in Exhibit 265, and I rudely interrupted you, but let's go back to 265. What marker was it that you were talking about?
Number 9.
Describe, if you will, for the jurors, what, if anything, was found at or near marker number 9.
In that location, we found what appeared to be a flattened bullet.
Could you tell the jurors from where that was found? Do you recall how it was found?
Yes. This was on the evening of March 1st after we had made entry into the garage. The videotaping had been completed, I believe. I had, done initial overall photography in the interior of the garage. And we then spent some time just kind of walking around the garage, looking for anything that we saw that stood out, things that we knew that we were going to collect as evidence. I was standing in the garage and I looked down at the floor. In front of me, there was a crack in the concrete, and I observed this round gray object that resembled like a head of a roofing nail.
I'm going to have you take a look at Exhibit number 268. Tell the jury what we're looking at here, please.
That is the crack in the concrete with what ultimately was found to be a bullet. It's the round gray object directly in front of the front edge of the photomaker.
Is Exhibit number 268 similar to how you found what you believe to be a bullet fragment near tent number 9?
Yes.
I assume tent number 9 was placed there after you found this?
Yes.
In other words, you didn't just get lucky and put the tent marker there, did you?
No.
I'm going to show you a closer version of that Exhibit 269. What are we looking at, please?
As you just stated, it's a close-up view of the same photograph from 268. It again depicts the bullet fragment in the crack in the concrete.
Using the laser pointer that you have with you, Investigator Heimerl, could you show the jury where the bullet fragment is at what we are looking at?
That would be it right here.
That fragment appears to be within a crack in the concrete Am I viewing that correctly?
Yes.
What was done, if you recall, to process or collect that item of evidence?
We took measurements to document its physical location within the garage, and it was then collected or packaged by investigator Steier.
I'm going to go back to exhibit number 266. We can just look on the large screen, that's fine. This green compressor that we're viewing here, on the next day, that is, on March 2nd of 2006, did you and other investigators begin or continue the process of actually moving items within this garage?
Yes.
And so that I can allow you to completely explain that process, describe this search. How thorough was this search of this garage?
If you recall from the first photograph, the overview photograph of the interior of the garage, the majority of the contents of the garage was around the exterior perimeter of the garage along the walls. And that included a couple of snowmobiles, which would then have multiple tools and boxes and items just stacked on top of the snowmobile. And there were chests, there were containers, there were large items of equipment. And basically started in the northeast corner of the garage and began to remove items, look at them, turn them over, look inside them, examine them visually to see if there was any obvious sign of some type of potential trace evidence of them or biological evidence. And it would be set down out of the way. We would move to the next item, whether it was large or small, whether it was a box. If it was a box, you would open the box and remove everything from it. And it was a very slow process, and we worked south along the east wall and continued around until we finished the garage late in the day on the 2nd.
Looking again at exhibit number 265, are you telling this jury that every one of those items, in fact, around the entire perimeter and, in fact, in the middle of the garage, was handled by law enforcement and examined?
Virtually every item, yes.
Let's go back then to item 266. During this process then, and specifically on the second day, the 2nd of March, you were again involved in the search of this garage?
Yes.
And during those efforts, that is, on the 2nd, did you generally have the same searching responsibilities that you did on the 1st?
What do you mean by searching responsibilities? My responsibilities?
Yeah. Were you still the guy taking the photos?
Yeah, yes.
All right. And also, were you actively searching? Were you one of the investigators who's actively searching for items of evidence?
Yeah.
On the 2nd of March, then, and specifically looking at exhibit number 266, did you find any items of evidence that was noteworthy?
Sorry, that was noteworthy?
That you believed was noteworthy? As you look at this picture, did you find anything near that compressor that you thought was interesting?
Yes.
Tell the jury about that.
We had been processing this garage, searching this garage. As you look at this photograph, we approached the compressor from its left, and it was a large object. And we reached this area. As we reached this area, I had to get onto my hands and my knees in front of the compressor and utilize the flashlight to look under the compressor. And I saw what I appeared to be a bullet.
What did you do then?
I told the other investigators that I may have found a bullet.
What happened then?
We then removed, basically from the top down, we unstacked the things and items that were on top of the air compressor, pulled the air compressor out so we could adequately document and photograph what we found.
Before I move on to other photos, I want to orient the jury. That red item immediately to the right and to the right edge of exhibit 266, do you know what that is?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
That is the edge of a large upright tool chest.
After the compressor was removed and all the items thereon, was that tool chest moved at all? Do you recall?
I don't recall that we needed to move it.
Okay, let's look at exhibit number 270, please. Tell us what we're looking at here.
This is generally a medium view photograph of what was ultimately identified with the marker number 23 as the bullet that was found underneath the air compressor.
Can you identify the individuals in this photograph, please?
The individual on the left is Detective Dave Remaker from Manitoba County Sheriff's Department.
Do you know who is kneeling on the right?
I would have to guess, but I do not know specifically.
All right. Well, it can only be one of a couple people. Is that right?
Right.
I mean, you would still have to guess who it was.
I believe that's Investigator Dietering.
We see a yellow tent, exhibit number 23. I have actually zoomed into that area. Tell the jury what we're looking at here, please.
As I stated, this is after the air compressor has been removed. The linear object here is a metal photographic scale. And right in this area, it's very difficult to pick out in this photograph, but the bullet was right between the tent and the scale.
Now, as the evidence tent is placed near the bullet. Was the bullet moved at all?
No.
This photography was done before any manipulation or movement of the bullet?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you a better photo. Exhibit 271. Tell me what that is, please.
That is a closer view of that bullet in the same location.
Can you take your laser pointer and show the jury what we're looking at?
The laser pointer is on the end of the bullet.
Once again, exhibit 271, that photograph. Does that depict the bullet in the same or similar view as you saw it on the 2nd of March?
Yes.
Actually, I'm going to leave that exhibit up for just a minute. When you observed this particular item, did it appear to be full, that is, an intact bullet or a bullet fragment?
I guess that depends on what a person were to consider a bullet fragment. That being, if a very tiny part of that bullet has come off of the main bullet, is the main bullet then a fragment? I considered this when I recognized this and looked at this. I recognized it as what appeared to be a nearly intact bullet.
So it was something other than just a little chip off a bullet?
Exactly.
Investigator, was care taken to process and recover this bullet?
Yes.
And tell the jury what care was taken to do that.
Well, it was handled only to the amount or to the degree which it needed to be handled. As much as I myself wanted to pick it up and visually examine it, it wasn't done. It was picked up, I believe, with tweezers and placed into a box and sealed.
Now, are you familiar with the term called DNA?
Yes, sir.
At that time, in processing of evidence, were you familiar with the process by which DNA could be extracted, especially from items such as bullet fragments?
Yes.
Was care taken not to destroy or eliminate whatever DNA might be on this bullet?
Yes.
As I understand from the last witness, after this bullet was packaged, it was provided to Investigator Steier from Calumet County for transport and receipt into evidence. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it is.
I feel compelled to ask these next two questions, and so I will. At any time, inside of that garage, on the 2nd, or even on the 1st, did you see an individual by the name of James Lang?
No.
At any time on the 1st or on the 2nd, did you see an individual by the name of Andrew Colborne?
No.
By the way, do you know those people? And if they were in that garage or rummaging around or placing something in that garage, would you have seen it?
Yes.
I will move the admission, Judge, of exhibits. I will have to identify them or ask the clerk the photographs and the physical evidence that has been marked and identified by this witness and investigator Steier, and I will pass the witness to Mr. Beauty.
All right.
Do we have 272 and 278? You don't have that, do you?
No.
Okay.
You are moving which exhibits, Mr. Kratz?
I'm moving everything that's been identified. Let me just have this witness look at 272, since he has that right in front of him. It's just a photograph. Can you tell us what 272 is?
By the tag, it's identified as number 19, a bullet fragment.
The actual item of that is actually, I think, right in front of you. Is that right? It's an evidence tech photo. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And do you have Exhibit 278?
Just so the record is clear, Your Honor, there's also a number FL, or identification in yellow FL, in the center of that. Would you agree?
Yes, that's a crime lab designation, Judge.
It is.
And 278 has not been offered or identified. With that exception, I would move the rest of the exhibits, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, Mr. Bruton, how long do you think you are looking for?
I'm hoping we can finish at 4:30, but if the jurors want to stretch for a moment, that's...
All right, let's do this. Let's take a 10-minute break. If we have to go a little past 4:30, we will, since we got a little late start today, but we'll finish up with this witness.
That's fine.
Let's give everybody a break. All right, Mr. Bruton, at this time you may begin your cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Agent Heimerl, you first became involved in this Avery investigation on November 6th. Is that right?
Yes, on Sunday,
Sunday.
November 6th.
And I appreciate your professionalism because you must have done close to 50 reports, I would say. Does that sound about right?
I believe so.
You were out investigating, doing this canvassing, this neighborhood canvass on the 6th, 7th, maybe even part of the 8th. Does that sound right?
Yeah. And it's continued for a few days afterwards.
Okay. And in the process of doing that, you're going around to all of the surrounding properties and interviewing door to door, basically, everybody, to see if they heard anything, saw anything, that kind of investigation, right?
Correct.
You did come to the scene, the Avery property scene, though, on the 7th, as I recall your testimony, right?
Yes.
And that's when you took custody, or did you just examine this burn barrel that we saw up on the screen a while ago?
I did not take custody of it. I photographed it.
All right. At any time on the 6th, 7th, 8th, or any time after that, actually, did anyone ask you to participate in a search of Mr. Avery's residence?
No.
Or garage?
No.
You work for DCI.
Correct.
Have you ever met Mr. Avery before that day?
I'm sorry?
Did you ever meet Mr. Avery before November 6th?
Never.
Have any contact with him at all?
Never.
Not involved in his lawsuit?
No, sir.
Completely independent and objective, right?
Correct.
And you're very well trained in searches of scenes for evidence collection, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, I know that if I understood correctly, you did not actually see the interior of Mr. Avery's garage on November 5th, 6th, or any of those days when you were there in November.
That's correct.
I'm going to first have you identify Exhibit 262 and 263. These were kind of left hanging from the prior witness. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
And are those photographs that you took on March 1st or 2nd?
Yes, they are.
And they show the interior of the garage pretty much as you found it when you first got there.
That's correct.
Okay. These are interior shots that you are already standing. Looks like inside the garage, and you don't have the full view, right?
Correct.
I'm going to use the Elmo. I don't have as much digital stuff, I'm afraid. All right. Thank you very much. We'll go through this quickly. but I just want you to identify so the jury can see what it is that you're identifying. This is a photograph of Mr. Avery's or the detached garage, March 1st or 2nd, probably March 1st, right?
Yes,
And there's a vehicle in there, some sort of an automobile, and it's not one of the later photographs you were shown, right?
correct.
And then what's that large item in front of it?
That's an engine hoist.
Okay. And that's something that you use to be able to lift up a full engine right out of a car or into it, right?
I believe so.
That was 263. And now I'm showing you 262, just a little bit of a different view, but also inside his garage on March 1st, showing the automobile and the large hoist, right?
Correct.
Okay. Actually, I think I will just do it right from here from the Elmo, since you've identified them already. I want to show you some photographs quickly from November that were taken by somebody else that are in evidence. So I just want you to, I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at these before, but the first one is Exhibit 232. Do you recognize that as the same garage?
It appears to be, yes.
All right. Do you see an engine hoist anywhere in this photograph? I should say the same engine hoist that we saw in those March photographs. Do you see one here?
No, but this photograph does not depict the entire garage.
I understand. Let's look through some more. Does that appear to be the same garage?
Yes, sir.
Now, there's a Suzuki Samurai that's been identified that's in there, and also a snowmobile, right?
Yes,
And neither one of those vehicles were in the garage when you came on March 1st.
correct.
They were both gone, and there was some kind of a maroon sedan, right?
Correct.
And again, any engine hoist that you see?
Not in this photograph, no.
How about oh, I showed you that one. How about in 233? Look like the same garage?
Yes,
No engine hoist.
not in this photograph.
How about this one?
Again, it appears to be the same garage.
And no engine hoist visible.
Not visible in this photograph.
And that last one was 234. 235. Do you recognize the entrance service door there?
Yes, I do.
No engine hoist in that one?
Not visible in the photograph.
Or in 236, which appears to be the east wall?
That's correct. Not visible.
Okay. And just one more. 241 appear to be the same garage, no engine hoist. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. A little bit dark, but
Okay. So from those pictures alone, would you agree with me that the scene had been altered between November and March 1st when you came?
yes,
Now, you did a very nice professional job of taking measurements of everything that was found, right? Everything you had anything to do with?
yes, we took measurements of the items of evidence that were collected.
All right. And very thorough measurements. For instance, the tent 23, that marker there, 23, you measured as 8 feet 9 inches west of the east wall, 12 feet, actually later changed to 12 inches. That was a typo, 12 inches north of the south wall, right?
Correct.
So you did a very nice job of measuring where every item was found by coordinating its distance from one wall to the next, right?
That's what we did, yes.
And that's how you've been trained to investigate a crime scene, a potential crime scene, right?
Well, that's one of the methods to use.
All right. Problem is, you came 4 months later after the scene had been altered, right?
I was there 4 months later, yes.
So none of these measurements tell us where any of these items were on November 5th, 2005. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Including the location of that bullet, number 23, that you showed, right?
Correct. The measurements that we took were the location of the bullet on March 2nd.
All right. You also were looking for, I believe, Mr. Kratz said, any agents of reagents, I guess was the term, that could in some way destroy or damage that evidence, right?
Correct.
And he mentioned specifically paint thinner or bleach, right?
Correct.
And there was a photograph of a bleach bottle, which I don't see here. Do you still have that up there?
I only have one photograph here.
Oh, I've got it. Sorry. I'm showing you 267. This is actually a paint thinner bottle. I'm sorry. So you found no bleach anywhere in the garage?
At this time, I don't recall if we found bleach or not.
Well, do you need to refresh your recollection with anything or?
Yes, the report was completed concerning the garage search would refresh my memory.
Okay. Now, you didn't actually prepare a report of that search, right? Of your own?
I did a very brief report regarding the fact that I photographed the garage during the course of this search.
Okay. All right. But Investigator Steier was the one who was documenting the times, and, he was kind of following along with you when you were doing those searches, right?
Correct.
I'm not going to mark this, but it's page 702 and 708 through 708. If you would just take a moment, maybe this will refresh your recollection as to whether there was any bleach in the garage.
Completed, sir.
Did you see any entry of any recovery of bleach?
No, I did not.
Okay, but did you find this paint thinner? Would you agree with me that this paint thinner appears to be an older bottle, not a brand newly purchased item?
Well, that bottle is dirty. I guess I can't comment as to its age.
Nothing about that looks like it was just bought and used a few days before the search.
I guess that would depend on what kind of conditions it would be used in.
All right.
It appears as though it's quite dirty.
Okay, we'll stick with that. And finally, paint thinner in someone's garage is not all that unusual, is it?
I would say that it's not unusual.
It's a very common item that many people have and use around the house, especially in a garage. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Exhibit 265. This is a photograph that you took, very helpful photograph, now that is taken after the maroon automobile was removed.
Yes, sir.
Were any other items moved before that photograph was taken, to your knowledge?
Did you say moved or removed?
I'm sorry. Were any other items moved on that day, March 1st, before that photograph was taken, other than just taking the car out?
Will you step to the side, please?
I'm sorry.
In an early photograph, specifically the previous photograph of the paint thinner, I know in the foreground of that photograph, the yellow stepladder was present, and that is in the back right corner directly in front of the ceiling-mounted furnace. But I don't see it in this photograph, so it may have been moved out of the way or collapsed and leaned somewhere so that we could collect the paint thinner.
All right. But I guess my point is this photograph was taken largely before you altered the scene as you saw it. And other than putting these markers there for items already found, or were these some of the ones that you found? Perhaps I have this wrong. Was this taken later during the search?
This was taken on the evening of March 1st.
Okay.
Obviously, after the vehicle was removed, and it was taken after, I believe, the first initial few items of evidence had been found.
I see. Yeah, there's a 9, 10, and 11 in there that wasn't there before?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you that right now. Exhibit 284 and 282. I'm sorry, 283. Can you identify those?
Yes, I can.
And what are they?
I believe that's 283.
It is, yes.
It's a photograph of evidence, or photographic marker number 10 in the crack in the concrete in front of it, what is later found to be a shell casing.
All right.
284 is photo marker number 11, And directly in front of the front edge of that, again, is a shell casing.
All right. Now, I'm going to put these up here for a moment, but if you could first use your laser pointer and show us on the exhibit that's on the screen where 9, 10, and 11 are.
There's 9, 10, and 11.
Showing you 283, that is a close-up view of where number 10 is, or what you found in number 10.
Correct.
Pretty obvious shell casing, empty shell casings laying right there in the open, in the crack.
I don't know if I would say it's obvious.
Well,
it's a relatively small shell casing as far as shell casings go, and
let me ask you this. If you searched this garage before and found 11 or 10 shell casings, do you think you would have found this one given its location?
Objection, speculation, Judge. And I would ask him to show the picture of how it looked on the 5th so we can see the Suzuki Samurai right over this location.
I will sustain the objection.
So Exhibit 265, counsel, is correct. We haven't had any testimony about whether the Samurai was ever moved during their search, so we'll move on. That is number 10. It appears to be in the eastern bay of the garage, correct?
Marker number 10?
Yes.
Yes.
Now let's move over to marker number 11. Do you see where that is?
Yes, I do.
Pretty much right in your pathway as you walk through the service door. Would you agree?
Well, it's at the edge of the pathway.
Okay. Let's look at a close-up of that one. Now, there's another shell, empty shell, right?
Yes, sir.
Just laying right out in the open, not in a crack, just sitting right on the surface of the concrete, right?
Yes.
Now, that was either not there on November 5th, or somebody completely missed the shell sitting right out in the open, because it's not in any of the other photographs.
Objection, speculation, and there would be other explanations.
Sustained. I think that's a question for the jury.
Well, would this be an indication that perhaps another indication that the scene had been altered from November if you're finding a shell casing pretty much right out in the open of this garage?
I don't know if I can draw that conclusion because I don't know the conditions of the scene in November. I was never in the garage, so...
Number 9, that snowbank is kind of hiding it. But would you agree with me that it's pretty much right in the middle of the opening to that bay of the garage, right? Do you want me to zoom back out?
No, that's okay. What are you referring to as that bay?
Well, this is a 2-car garage. We would be referring to an east bay and a west bay. This would be the west bay of the garage, and it's really just a couple of feet or so inside the big overhead garage door.
Correct.
And the close-up that you showed of this, I will not do the close-up one, 268. This isn't so good on the Elmo. This is the other bullet that you found in the garage, the only other bullet, correct?
Correct.
You found just these 2 bullets, number 9 and number 23?
Correct.
And this one you found just walking around, but still in the early stages of the search, after you had taken photographs of everything, just kind of walking around and looking down, and there you see this, right?
Yes.
You weren't on your hands and knees.
No, I was not.
Okay. Now, this very thorough search also included a jackhammer, didn't it?
I don't understand your question, sir.
The search of the garage on March 1st or 2nd included the use of a jackhammer.
Yes, the use of a jackhammer. Correct.
I'm sorry, I was maybe not clear. And what they actually did with that jackhammer was to remove an entire area, 15 feet or so, where the crack runs north and south down the middle of that easternmost bay of the garage, right?
Correct.
And all of those pieces of concrete were broken into sort of chunks all the way down the line, right?
Correct.
They were all collected?
Correct.
And they were all preserved?
Correct.
For testing, if possible.
Yes.
To your knowledge, were they sent to the crime lab?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Just a couple of other quick things. You showed us the rivet that you had found through the processing, not the sifting, but the stirring up of materials on, you mentioned 2 occasions, right?
Correct.
Do you remember those dates? I don't know that we ever established that.
Yes, December 19 and 20 of 2005.
5?
Thank you. Occurred in Madison. And the Shilton dates were April 10 and 11 of 2006.
Okay. And the materials that you were going through on both days was the debris that had been removed from the so-called burn pit area, is that right?
Yes, and actually, I believe it was the burn pit as well as other areas from around the property where burned debris had been found.
Okay. But all of that same general area and not a burn barrel or anything. You weren't mixing the two together?
No, the burn barrel was searched on those dates or on one of those dates in Madison, but I was not involved in the search of the burn barrel.
Okay. But as far as the burn pit area goes and the immediate surrounding vicinity, all that debris that you went through, you said you found a rivet?
I'm sorry?
You say you found a clothing rivet. How many?
I believe there were 5 rivets found.
Okay. You did not find a button, the clasp of a big button that you used to button your jeans at the waist, did you?
I know from reviewing evidence documents and reports regarding that there were items found that were described as close snaps, but I don't specifically recall that they were
Right.
what you were referring to.
Okay. Well, for instance, you mentioned the rivet that says Daisy Fuentes sort of stamped into it, a brand name of some sort, right?
Yes, sir.
You have never seen a button that would be used to clasp the waist of a pair of jeans or denim that says Daisy Fuentes on it, did you?
I don't recall seeing that, no.
And that's through your entire search of the burn pit area, right?
Well, the material that came from that burn pit area.
That's what I mean, yes. Okay, and finally, you mentioned that investigators basically picked up, looked at, and moved almost every single item in that garage, if not every single item.
Yes, almost every item there.
March 1st and March 2nd, right?
Yes, sir.
And though not one single piece of those items, not one single item showed any evidence of any blood spatter, did they? Or did they?
To my knowledge, as to what conclusions could be drawn at the end of March 2nd, no. But I know that additional items of evidence removed from that garage were sent to the laboratory, and I may not be privy to that.
You may not be privy to that.
Correct.
But as far as you know, no physical items showed evidence of blood spatter. Do you know what blood spatter is?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what high velocity blood spatter is?
Yes.
That's what we get when someone is shot with a bullet.
Correct.
And you saw no evidence of it at this scene at all, did you?
No.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Kratz?
Just one area of follow-up. Because we had heard that this was a 2-day search, do you know if that garage had been secured between day 1, that is, the 1st of March, and day 2, the 2nd of March?
Are you saying over the evening hours between our 2-day search?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
And how was that secured? Do you remember?
It was secured with a padlock.
Is that a picture of the padlock, the locked garage between the 1st and 2nd of March?
Well, that's either the picture of the padlock on the morning that we arrived on March 2nd, or it's a picture of the padlock that we found on the garage on March 1st when we arrived to do the search.
In any event, the garage was secured. In other words, people couldn't just walk in and out of the garage in between those 2 days. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's all I have of Mr. Heimerl for today, Judge.
Just one last follow-up then. With regard to the security of the garage and who could have come and gone, Mr. Avery certainly couldn't have been one of those who came and went into that garage, right?
When, sir?
Well, we'll just talk about it. Mr. Avery was arrested in November of 2005, right?
That's my understanding, and that's why I asked you to clarify the dates.
And you understand that he was in jail continuously from that date, at least through March 1st and 2nd, right?
That's my understanding.
So anybody who may have been in and out of that garage during that time period could not have been Stephen Avery.
That's what I would conclude.
Thank you.
All right, the witness is excused for today. Members of the jury, that concludes our proceedings for today. I will remind you again at this time that you are not to discuss the case with anyone, watch any news media accounts about it, or discuss it with anyone in any way. You are excused for today. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Your Honor, I always forget to move the exhibits. Could I move in the last 2 exhibits?
Any objection?
No, that's fine.
Those exhibits are admitted. They are numbers
283 and 284.
very well.
Thank you.
I keep promising, Judge, to ask for an accounting of what exhibits aren't in yet. Perhaps the clerk, then, tomorrow morning, first thing, we can discuss that. Make sure that they're all in.
All right, we'll do that then.
Judge, as long as everybody is still here, could we, I guess 262 and 263 were marked and not admitted earlier. I had this witness identify them. Now I would like to move them as well.
262 and 263?
Those are photographs with the engine hoist that he took in March.
That's fine.
Okay, those 2 exhibits are admitted.